Faith in quick tests leads to epidemic that wasn't. In January 22nd, 2007, nearly everyone involved thought the medical center had had a whooping cough outbreak. Nearly 1,000 healthcare workers in New Hampshire were given a test. Results were in. 142 people, including the doctor herself, were told that they appeared to have whooping cough. Thousands were given antibiotics, a vaccine for protection. Hospital beds were taken out of commission, including some of the intensive care. Sound familiar? The whole thing was a false alarm. Not a single case of whooping cough was confirmed with the definitive test. They placed too much faith in a quick, highly sensitive molecular test that led them astray. At Dartmouth, the decision was to use a test PCR, even with the acronym, because it was so early, for polymerase chain reaction. And it led to the epidemic that wasn't. Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Thursday, January 6, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. A lot of different things to cover. We're going to be focusing on the COVID-19 development into today, which I've been keeping an eye on, as I've been telling you guys over the last so many months, and even before, obviously, during the peak. But I've been very hesitant to talk about every little blip on the radar just because I was worried, and I still am, that we might be in a way doing their job of propagandizing the topic for them. So I've been very careful on what I would focus on. But today I saw a few things over the last week, really, that I wanted to make sure we kind of highlighted, not necessarily to ring that bell yet and say that this thing is back, but really just recognize the precursors that we've typically seen, and it's there should that decide to be executed. I want to also focus on one part of the kind of, we've been here and there highlighting the bird flu hype, H5N1, and the interesting overlap, the conversation of the injection, and the new ones coming forward where they're already working on mRNA overlaps. But I wanted to highlight a couple of interesting points around the person that they're pointing to in the recent Mexico case, as well as just, actually a little bit of a point about the injection that Finland is apparently going to start allowing to be taken by certain groups, which is very interesting to me, because as much as the way we're supposed to think about vaccination is sort of a prophylactic, it's not always the way these things are designed or work. And in this context, like a good example would be that you don't just go out and get your routine Ebola vaccine. It's for certain time frames, and even then, not to even get into whether I think any of these things are appropriate with the intent and the field behind all of this work. But interestingly, seeing this come out now, and I'll go into why I think that's not necessary, and the one that they're talking about, I don't want to try to remember the name off the top of my head. I'll point at it when we get there, is rife with all of the same problems we've seen before. And I'll make that exact point for why all of those potential risks should only be necessary in the situation where you're actually in danger. And that's not what's happening right now, not even with the cases they're pointing to. They themselves will tell you, just like with the COVID variant conversation, that it's less dangerous, spreads faster, like in very rare, low risk. And all that's assuming it's even actually there, which is a point we're going to talk about today. It's alarming to see that these things have not dissipated, even among certain circles that called these things out. It's very interesting. Now, I'm going to talk about in a future show my concern about using mRNA or even siRNA solutions for the same kind of problems. Now, it's not to say that those might not have some kind of positive effect, like anything we could talk about. I just am, like most people, I have a huge block, and I'm very, very, very concerned, skeptical about anything in that direction at this point, even from people that were on the right side of that conversation. So that's something we're going to talk about. I just want to kind of plant that seed because I'm worried about all of the way this goes. But we're also going to talk about interesting developments in regard to Israel and Gaza and Lebanon that Robert recently covered. Over the last couple of days, there's been a lot of surge in that conversation, and it's been ongoing for quite a long time. If you've been following this platform, you've seen Robert's coverage of this extensively going back years. And just since October 7th, even there, and highlighting the different back and forth, we covered that a Reuters journalist was killed in Lebanon within, I think it was the 13th of October. actually broke that story about a week and a half before even Reuters admitted that, not because it wasn't self-evident, verifiable, but because they were dragging their feet, like we're still seeing around, even when their own journalist is killed by Israel. We're going to talk about that that important discussion. We're going to talk about a great breakdown from Robert about Bill Maher's recent, not recent, but recent in the sense of over the last year, I think before October 7th, I remember correctly, in any case, about Palestine, and just really importantly breaking down, because the clip went viral, the lies. I mean, flat out, I mean, I find it hard to believe he doesn't know some of these are lies, but in any case, we'll go through and break those down for you. And, and I'll probably leave it there because there's a lot that I have lined up that we'll try to get to if there's time. But I was going to plan on discussing the recent attack on the UNRWA school, which, as horrifying as it actually is, that's not even that new. It's happened more time. I've lost count of how many times Israel's bombed UNRWA schools and killed children. It's a very important story, but unfortunately, it's something they've continued to do. And so my point is that there are other stories that I think are in the lineup should be discussed first. I mean, even saying that makes me feel gross because we're talking about such important things. I guess the real point in there is that it's unfortunate, it's sad, it's disgusting that we're in a time where people presenting themselves as fighting for the right thing, the honorable thing, all morality, law are the ones mostly ignoring or gaslighting, hiding stories like that. But we will talk about that as well. And there was a couple of things we'll get to, but we'll leave it there, I think. Oh, and one of the things in the title that I will get to for sure, which I put it reportedly on purpose because it's interesting. Israeli media is reporting that the UN has put Israel on a blacklist, or rather they got notified of it before it's about to be announced, apparently today or tomorrow. At least that's what they're reporting. And the only reason I would not just report that as what Israel's reporting is because of how much we've seen Israel just in general, and the media, even around that, not all of it, lie unquestioningly, just without just no issue at all. So it's important to see that they're reporting it. And the other point is, the reason I think it's worthy of reporting is because it's the reasoning behind it, because they're killing children, is what the article discusses, is self-evident. It's obviously happening. So it's an interesting point to cover. And a lot of other bombings and murder and horrible things we'll get to that I think are important for you to see, even though it is hard to continue to look at. Well, I will start with one update that I think is important, more of a correction, but it's sort of a different, it is a correction based on what we recently said, but the way this went down was not necessarily a mistake in the context of even, I forget who actually first reported this. It was in fact reported from the journalist who covered the story, speaking directly with Scott Ritter, which is why everybody thought it was sound, incorrectly, I guess, which I find hard to believe, reported that Judge Napolitano was also taken off this airplane. Now, it turns out he wasn't. He himself tweeted this out underneath the conversation directly from Sputnik saying he was taken, that it says, quote, "I was neither on the plane nor at the airport when this incident occurred. Scott Ritter's free speech and travel rights were profoundly violated," because that was real what happened to him. If you don't remember, he got taken off a flight on the way in New York, flying to St. Petersburg, and detained. I mean, it's a political detention. This might as well be Israel at this point. This is what we're talking about. And it's very alarming to see this happen. Judge Napolitano was reported to have been taken alongside him. Apparently, Napolitano, speaking about this, said that Ritter was misunderstood, I guess, by the journalist who reported that. Very, very strange. In any case, make sure we corrected that. And so you know that apparently he was not. So despite the reports, he was not on the same plane nor taken. So just important to make sure we correct that. Now, I want to start with some important COVID-19 conversation and bird flu. Interestingly, first and foremost, I wanted to highlight a great interview I had with Derek Brose around the Summit of the Future. And as I titled it, the shell game of authoritarian control. He talks about the Libertarian Convention. We talk about his coverage of the Bethany Christian Services, which is part 2 is about to come out, possibly, most likely tomorrow morning. But we highlighted that we had a really good conversation about this very alarming thing called the Summit of the Future. And just to break it down quickly, I highly recommend you watch the entire interview. Derek makes excellent points in the article as well. That's sourced. It looks like I forgot to put the links in there. I'll have to do that when we get done. I guess I forgot. Anyway, that will be in there shortly after this. But the point is that his article discussing this goes over the alarming point that the Summit of the Future, which is a great, very much the Great Reset, World Economic Forum, all that very same direction. So as you can see, Sustainable Development Goals, United Nations, the whole thing. And this is about sort of a more broad, kind of opaque conversation about all of the stuff we're worried about. Again, to make it quick, the point is that the pandemic accord, the treaty, that conversation, at least as being presented to have stalled. Doesn't mean it went away, not even remotely. In fact, it seems to be continuing, but it's very much presented as sort of stalled. They can't agree, which we've all rightly so heralded as a positive thing. My worry and Derek's worry is that this is sort of a surreptitious concept, as usual, get you looking over here, make you think this has stopped, and then this kind of subtle one comes into the side. The point is the Summit of the Future seems to have all the trappings of all the same stuff. In a very broad way, seemingly can still be applied to undermine sovereignty. And so my worry was that this was sort of what's the right word for it? A bait switch, where we look over here, we think this is stopped, and then this thing comes through, and if we see it, we go, oh, well, it's less dangerous. So the kind of thing gets you to accept something that doesn't seem as bad, and when the plan was this was always what they wanted you to accept, or maybe we're just not even supposed to see it. In any case, maybe we're wrong, but the point is, look at it for yourself. I see it in there, and it worries me. It worries me that this is the way it's supposed to go, and this is going to cement the same problem while we're looking in the wrong direction. That's always something we should consider. And on that interesting note, I've been talking about a lot of I always am talking about contentious stuff, contentious even for the two-party paradigm, which is important to think about. And I lately haven't gotten a lot of censorship on YouTube. I don't even talk about it anymore because it seems to happen damn near every time. But over the last couple of months, it's weirdly stopped. I get them here and there, but not a lot, which is not like I used to get, which was basically every show we would do. But all of a sudden, the one that YouTube decides to censor, the Summit of the Future, the shell game of authoritarian control, that kind of tends to tell me something. Maybe it's just because they noticed it. I don't know. Interesting, nonetheless. On that note, by the way, if you want to participate in our pirate channel community, give me an email, ryan@thelastamericanvagabond.com, pirate channel in the subject. I think I say it different every time, something pirate, so I can find it in my endless black hole of emails that end up in spam, even if it's the right, good ones. If you want to take part, because I need new pirate channels because they are censoring them. But I thought that was interesting. So on that note, let's talk about the COVID-19 direction, which I think is acutely aligned, is a huge part of the Great Reset direction and the Summit of the Future, and specifically the pandemic accord conversation. It doesn't have to just be about medical freedom, but I think that's obviously the central part of the way that they kind of put this together. So, like I said before, I'm not trying to say that I think this is all coming back right now, but we can see very clearly that this could be the same conversation if they wanted this to go the same way with the same stuff. And actually, now that I say that right out of the gate, the point being that this is an illusion that does not require facts, does not require actual virus or actual sickness, or whatever you think about those things. And that point is not debatable. Danny Rencourt, with his amazing research on this, the data itself that he breaks down in this study proves that COVID-19 is an illusion. Now, it doesn't have to mean it's not there. What it means is that he proved with the data that you could present exactly the same way using PCR false positives, using the conflation of flu and pneumonia, using the vaccine side effects that came afterward, and can frame all of this. You could have presented the same thing. Statistically speaking, you could have done that. So I think that's clearly what did happen. The question is, was it entirely as if nothing was there, or was it just using which we'll point out again in a minute with peer-reviewed science, a thing that was less than the flu from the very beginning, at least as the scientific study found, and then bolstering it with fake information. So keeping that in mind, just knowing how easy it would be to just hype this kind of information, a great clip from Camus just highlighting that in Victoria, in Melbourne, in Australia, they're now pointing to, and this was 4 days ago, another surge, at least what they're calling it, which, by the way, that could mean like 2% more than it was yesterday. Oh, surge. And it's the same thing, by the way, they're going to do with the ambulance in here, the same thing we saw during the entire COVID-19 illusion. The ambulance is overwhelmed and the hospitals are overwhelmed. And you look into it even barely and you realize that, well, that area might be a little bit over the top, but over here, completely nothing. And this hospital's totally empty. It was a game constantly. Whether these people even knew that. So keep that in mind. That's the same thing happening here. An increase here or there, and we don't get to find out whether it's flu itself, COVID-19, if that's even really what's happening, or if it's just symptoms, the PCR test, and people testing more. keeping all that in mind, here's the clip he just played about how this is at least starting to come back.
Rates of respiratory illnesses, including flu and COVID-19 cases, are putting Victorian ambulance services under increasing pressure.
Right. So right out of the gate, ask yourself, well, what's the breakdown? Is it all flu with a few COVID? Is it all COVID with a few flu? Is it 50-50? I mean, does that make a difference for the conversation? It should.
Let's cross live to our reporter, Cristian Mayer in Melbourne. Morning to you, Chris.
Or none.
Christy, now flu cases have increased by 65% in the last fortnight alone.
Good morning, Sal. That's right. Winter has only just arrived, but already flu is up 65% right across Victoria. And it isn't just the flu. COVID is on the rise again as well.
Just the way that they frame that, it sounds to me like it's my point. The reason I said it in the first place is just 65% increase doesn't tell you what the percentage breakdown is of what's getting reported. You know, you can have a 90% increase in flu, but have 70% of the cases or vice versa. The point is, I think that's a flu being reported, which could just be damn near anything. And then some COVID on there as well. And they just frame it as COVID and flu because it's about hype. These people have built an industry around hype, especially in the medical field.
Cases of that have doubled in recent weeks. There are currently 361 people in hospital with COVID, and around 24 of those are in the ICU.
Okay, so if they're in with COVID, what does that mean again? Let's brush back up on our information, right? That means a PCR test. That means in some cases, still to this day, a circumstantial thing where you have the right kind of circumstances with the right symptoms, and we just deem that a COVID case. These things all still exist. The point is, in this case, those things aren't definitive, not even remotely, and they still use them. And that doesn't mean that they're doing this intentionally. It could be what we'll make that point again in a second about the epidemic that wasn't just making the mistakes because the wrong tools have been put in your hands, or people at some higher level are doing this on purpose for their own interests. Doesn't mean the person reporting this knows, the doctor taking the test, but it means it's very easy to lie about this. As well, always consider that maybe it just is something happening. But the point is that they're still using the same broken methods to find the same answers. How do we not assume that it's going to end up in the same broken way?
It's putting significant pressure on paramedics. Code Orange has been called every day of the past week, 20 times in the past month. And that's the most serious health alert, where the whole health system is notified that ambulances are under pressure and extra staff are called in.
And don't forget, in the UK, they did this whole breakdown where they make the same claim about ambulances are overwhelmed almost every year, well before COVID. So the story is that the same thing happens even after COVID. So there's no difference. Got it. But they just make it sound like, oh my God, our hair's on fire. And you look at the data and it's the same. Yes, they're overwhelmed. It happens in seemingly every season. That was in the UK at the very least. Right. And so all of this builds to the idea that what's their solution? A dangerous thing, a thing we know is hurting people. Get it right now. Hurry up for the thing that we can't even prove is actually happening. At the very least is not dangerous based on any metric you can look at anywhere. So it's not hard to recognize this is hype, no matter how you look at it, because it gets people scared. It gets people talking, using the, sharing the information in regard to their link or their YouTube channel or watching it on TV. It becomes about promotion. And I guarantee you they're getting a benefit from that, seeing as how every corporate platform out there, one of their leading advertisers are big pharma companies.
Now, the Victorian Health Department is urging everyone, reassuring everyone that they are prepared for these busy winter months. But there are a couple...
Unless it gets a little bit more bad, and then, oh my God, we're screwed because nobody can deal with this, right? Isn't that what happened last time? Don't worry, we're super prepared. And then everything hair on fire for the rest of the time, because I think it's about framing it as we're prepared. And then we weren't prepared for this is what happens every single time. I mean, if you haven't followed this, look at every single event we've talked about. Even in their exercises, they come to the conclusion that we weren't ready. Isn't that ridiculous? It's because this is about predictive programming, in my opinion anyway. Otherwise, you have to acknowledge that there's some of the most inept, incompetent entities that we've ever experienced. And why are they still in power? Because everywhere you look. Every single time. Okay, good example. Event 201. What did they find in Event 201? The conclusion, at least some of the main ones, where we didn't have enough ventilators, we didn't have enough PPE, we weren't prepared for X, Y, and Z. Okay, they laid it out. What'd they do? And trust me, I'm not even suggesting those are the right things or that this is not all an illusion. My point is this: what they presented to you was that we said we didn't need these things. They didn't do those things. And how did it end up? We didn't have enough ventilators. We didn't have enough PPE. Because that's the way it was supposed to go, in my opinion. Look at the SPARS pandemic and the exercises. They come to those conclusions that we were caught lying or they didn't have enough. It's like even when they exercise it, they admit to you they're dishonest. It's actually pretty mind-blowing.
couple of messages from health officials for Victorians, and the first is to save 000 calls for ambulances for genuine emergencies, and the second is to consider getting the whole family a flu jab.
Of
Yeah,
course.
some good advice there. All right,
Rush in
thanks,
and get the
Beck.
thing that you don't need, just in case. Right? It's the same kind of mantra that we've seen from the very beginning. I'm talking the same thing for a flu shot or whatever we talk about. We realize that these problems have been there from before. If you look into the information, you can see an increase in myocarditis from the flu shot. I did a whole segment on this. That's not to say that the point is this is always your choice, despite what they pushed on you throughout this whole process. You can decide for yourself if you care to do the research and not just blindly trust what your doctor says or trust what the media says, which is where the doctor tends to look, is that ultimately there are risks to all of these things. And I'll make that clear with the Sakeb shot or whatever it's called. We'll get to the H5N1, well, actually H8N1, which is the shot. We'll talk about that in a second. That there are risks with all of these things. And so if you think there's a risk to you from the flu, factor that in. What does that look like? Am I going to die? Almost never in most people's circumstances. So what can happen over here? They don't ever do that. They just scream at you that it's the right thing to do because there's a whole business around this. And some of them think that. But let me go over some of these risks in a second, actually. Before that, we're going to get to, let me include that really quickly. Make sure you watch this if you haven't seen this, this discussion with Denny Rancor. Now, on that point, she's talking about testing and all. And so, again, it's very important to recognize they're still using the PCR test. They're still utilizing exactly what led this astray. I mean, again, it's impossible to me that this wasn't a deliberate action. Every single thing we've talked about, from the mask conversation, the study from, I think it was 2015, that proves in their peer review research, the same research they told you to trust, that the cloth masks were increasing illness in every possible way, not just COVID, but increasing your risk of illness. They knew it. I highlighted it. I titled in 2020, and I screamed about it ever since. And yet they forced cloth masks in particular on everybody, gaining extra illness. Okay, the PCR test. Well, here's the point there. This is from 2007. I've highlighted this 4,000 times. I'll just play the clip again. I played in the opening because I think it's important that you see that if you didn't catch the opening, and you can read this for yourself. The main points, the epidemic that wasn't. About 8 months it went on. People got sick. They put people in quarantine, they hospital beds, the whole 9 yards. Not a single case was actually confirmed they were using a PCR test. Now they look back and oh my God, we placed too much faith in the PCR test. Wow. And her whole point in this is that we'll do this again. We got to make sure we learn from this. And you know what? They did learn from it. They just went the other direction. PCR test. And in case you just didn't see it, I'll play the clip. It's very fast. But they say the most troubling aspect is that all the decisions seem so sensible. Why? Because they're trusting an industry. They're trusting authority. Doesn't mean you disregard authority. In some cases, that is the right move, but doesn't mean you just blindly do one or the other. It's like question everything, deny everything. No, we question everything and we accept all possibilities or entertain them. In this case, of course you question authority, because can't they just make a mistake? This idea that we're supposed to blindly follow anything is ridiculous. But let's watch the clips in case you haven't seen it. This is important. Faith in quick tests leads to epidemic that wasn't. In January 22nd, 2007, nearly everyone involved thought the medical center had a whooping cough outbreak. Nearly 1,000 healthcare workers in New Hampshire were given a test. Results were in. 142 people, including the doctor herself, were told that they appeared to have whooping cough. Thousands were given antibiotics, a vaccine for protection. Hospital beds were taken out of commission, including some of the intensive care. Sound familiar? The whole thing was a false alarm. Not a single case of whooping cough was confirmed with the definitive test. They placed too much faith in a quick, highly sensitive molecular test that led them astray. Yeah, you get the point. That's important, guys. It's important to make sure, read the entire article. It's very important to understand how easy that was to manipulate. And even if you think it was all an accident, I find it impossible to believe that they weren't aware of that there wasn't a conversation around how that happened. It was a huge event. It was a big deal. The New York Times wrote an entire article about it, and it was a big conversation at the time, and they were very clear. I mean, it was Dartmouth, right? They were saying, look, this is a problem. We need to make... I'm convinced that is exactly what happened, and they just decided, well, we will use that. We'll use that. I mean, and really, we could go off on there's multiple ways that this can be used to lie about a lot of stuff, not even just in medical freedom. But I'll include this article as well, similar image to the Danny Rancourt one, but you have every reason to question everything you're told about variants, vaccines, masks, and PCR tests. It's a good breakdown. There's a lot of other shows in there you should watch as well. Now, here's what I think is most incredible is that we're talking about this right now when there's nothing really happening. No one's even barely even talking about this. And now they're the FDA advisors, the same ones they broadly ignored about damn near everything during the height of this, who would vote that we don't need this or it's not safe or doesn't, they would disregard them. Many of them resign in protest because they weren't. Now they vote, the new ones, the ones that are probably more amenable, to unanimously vote in favor of the updated COVID-19 shot. The updated COVID-19 shot. Now, look, the flu conversation is the way they frame this every year is that they guess, right? We go, what do we think is happening? What do we think the most likely variant is? And they make a shot around it. Now, of course, we talk about the quadvalent, and that's what most of these are these days. The shots in there, multiple variants, as we're told, assuming you believe any of it. My point is just like during the COVID-19 conversation. Well, isn't there an issue with having multiple things cause multiple antibodies? Well, yeah, there really is. And this is why they talked about that during COVID and before. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed to cause a problem, but it certainly can. And so you have to consider those. Is the flu that dangerous? Can you deal with some sniffles and a headache and think about it versus lasting issues, myocarditis? I mean, these things to some degree are possible with all of these. And the point being that the quadvalent does produce antibodies that lead to multiple things, which can cause problems in and of itself. But this isn't the new one they're telling you for the COVID-19 shot. So this whole time it's been there apparently with the old thing. And still, you can still get it if you want. With all of the risks and all of the problems and all the very serious issues, which, by the way, still apply to this right now. And they went away from the bivalent, quad, all the rest of it. Now, just for one thing they're aiming it at. Now, with all the hype around all that's happening and all the 40,000 variants they're having all the time, to go to one? I mean, just so you know, if you haven't watched this show, I don't recommend you get any of this, any of the COVID shots, any of the mRNA, let alone any of the rest we're talking about. But for them to go down to one, it just seems like a really interesting narrative shift. So it says the committee voted on the question for the 2024 to 2025 formula. Right, so they're getting ready just like they told you, just like many of us told you they would, but they called it conspiracy at the time. It's going to become just like the flu. They're going to give you a routine shot. And, we're going to get to a point where they're going to combine these things. They're going to add new things because we're going to pretend like it's all safe and effective since we're just leaving it there, right? It says, does the committee recommend a monovalent JN1 lineage, which for those of you that are really acutely paying attention to this, I haven't focused elsewhere recently, but I'm just, keep an eye on it. But JN1, new to me. All 16 people said, yes, let's make one based on that new thing. And it says, if the agency agrees with its advisory committee, so the FDA, of course, will agree, seeing as how they're just a complete vaccine, we've seen through the COVID-19 conversation. The FDA routinely ignored its experts. It routinely went with the side of what politics and big pharma was. They were caught for lying about ivermectin in an actual court of law. These people are not on your side. Now, it doesn't mean that every person in every facet of the conversation is willfully deceiving you. I believe in all of these industries, you'll find, and I do believe they're industries, you'll find elements of people that believe they're doing the right thing, whether it's USAID or any of these. I make that point because we just saw them screaming at Samantha Powers about how we're not doing the right thing. It's like, well, you don't know what this job really is. These people are not out there fighting for freedom. They're actively committing regime change for other things. But in this case, it's the same thing. There's probably plenty of people in the FDA that think they're doing the right thing. Plenty. Well, that's a stretch. But either way, the point is, if they agree, the FDA, after their advisors, the new shot will be a monovalent vaccine offering protection against one variant. So with all the risks that are guaranteed in this thing, which we'll go over again, this is the same mRNA dangerous shot. Even if you think this thing has a benefit, now they're only aiming it at one. So your risk could still be that you get the other thing and die from the super dangerous COVID. That's not actually dangerous or even possibly there. Nonetheless, I think this is about trying to lessen the scare, the worry people have about all the different overlapping things. But it says the FDA told the advisory committee Wednesday that studies have shown that currently available COVID vaccines appear to be less effective against the variants that are now in circulation. Well, I'm getting to a point here about why this is hilarious, seeing as how this thing has been around since December. They were telling you it was 80% of what was going on like 6 months ago, 7 months ago. So how did that make sense? With everything else they were screaming at you, and just so you're clear on this, I don't believe any of this. I believe the hype and the lies about, as Dr. Yeadon pointed out, he calls them scariants or samients, basically hyping the smallest difference that will not make a difference in the long run. But it says when manufacturers updated their vaccines last year to better match the variants that were in circulation, then it seemed to better offer protection. This is what they actually said. Match does matter somewhat. Dr. Jerry Weir, director of the Division of Viral Products in the Office of Vaccines Research and Review at the FDA, said, "Are you serious? It matters somewhat? If it's such a small matter, then why don't we just aim it at whatever we want and say, well, it'll work because you say that anyway. You said it during Omicron or the rest of them, whatever was really happening when it was not working and the data showed it wasn't. We highlighted that and you called us conspiracy theorists. And then 6 months later, you look back and go, oh yeah, it wasn't working very well. Well, duh, that's what we were saying at the same time. The point is it's the same damn thing. There's two ways to look at it. If you believe there's a thing, JN1 circulating out there, the point is that this is not dangerous to you based on the information that we currently have, even according to them. The mRNA shot is very dangerous for you. So it's a ridiculous thing to do. If it's not actually there, this is about them trying to pretend like they're, I'm really just hyping the threat to force you into doing this. And I don't know why, if you didn't think it was there, you would even touch this. But doesn't it matter somewhat? Like in any logic we apply to this, that doesn't make any sense at all. It should matter entirely. If you're aiming at the wrong thing, it doesn't matter much. I mean, this doesn't make much sense to me. Here's what it says. The COVID-19 cases are relatively low right now. Only 3 to 4% of people who are getting tested have the virus. So not just 3 to 4% of people, but people who are getting tested for it, only 3% of them seem to have it. Now, are you seeing COVID deaths right now? Well, no. You know why? Because this is not dangerous. And it says, by comparison, at the peak of the Omicron surge, which I still ask whether that was even, there's so many facets to get into this, whether Omicron was the released thing from South Africa or, Bosnia and all that conversation, or Botswana, excuse me. And it says in the surge of 2021, test positivity rates were at 30%. Well, we went over this manipulation at the Omicron conversation. There was a dropout in regard to the test that they just labeled as the new thing, even though before that was used as a negative test. So essentially negative tests started becoming Omicron. I mean, there's so many angles to this. And the point was at that hype, you could prove that was a manipulation. So the question is, are they now manipulating it to be a low number, or is they just, I don't think we should be trusting any of this stuff, which I'm pretty sure you're all in the same vein about. Now, here are what they're highlighting. JN1 being tracked by the CDC. It says as of December 8th, 2023, they project that this variant comprises 29%. So here, and then it says it's a variant of it's closely related to the BA.2.86, the same thing from before. So ask yourself, if they were claiming that the earlier ones, the original thing they gave you was still having a strong effect against whatever variant they were in last time, and they're telling you they need to make this one, even though it's a few offshoots of the BA1 they just put out. Is that just vaccine sales? Are they just trying to put out a new thing to pump new sales? Probably. At the end of the day, every year around, before I jump ahead, actually, this is the other part of the variant. This is as of January 31st. So in January, they were telling you that it was 83 to 88% of all that was circulating. So even if that's true, and again, undercurrent of all this, I don't believe any of it, but the point is that they're claiming it was 88% in January. It's June 6th right now. So we're to believe this thing has been circulating, and if we're going to believe their narrative, it spreads like crazy and circulates all over. We're not going to talk about it. It's not what's happening. So it's not dangerous if it's even there. But we're going to believe that now it's the peak right now. All this time later, it's the one that's circulating. I don't believe that for a second, even if again, based on their narrative, not to make it confusing for everybody, but the point is I genuinely don't believe that this is even happening. So Centers for Disease Control and Prevention project that JN1 cases in January will continue to rise through the winter. They're talking about last winter, guys. The World Health Organization has declared it a variant of interest. There's no evidence that JN1 causes more severe disease, but it spreads. It's the same thing I've been telling you from the very beginning of this. Well, if you understand that, if Dr. Yeadon and plenty of other experts that have honesty will tell you that that's what usually happens. They get less virulent, they spread more, and the population becomes benign, becomes a background thing, like flus and everything else we deal with. So they're telling that's what's happening. Instead, they jam an injection in there. They create the problem by using these injections. And we highlighted this 45 times during the peak of this. What they were doing is what's created, not just the vaccine side effects, but in fact is creating, I think it's called a leaky vaccine. They've created the thing that causes the problem. It creates kind of indefinite sickness. It creates these things to then actually mutate, if you believe that's what's happening. So it's a compounding problem. They're the ones creating the thing they later point to. It's pretty easy to understand. So when you're dealing with something that they're admitting is less virulent, it's not this, but it just spreads a lot. The reality should be to let that happen. You're not hurting people, to then gain immunity to it, actual immunity, not jamming a dangerous shot in your child's arm that actually removes their immunity, causes them to get sick, and then act like you're keeping people safe. This is lunacy, just like before. Now, my point in all of this is that as this is all going on, and again, there's a lot more angles we can go into, but who knows if this is actually going to be hyped. This is just what they're saying they're going to make new shots for, and maybe they'll just say it's there if you want it. Who knows? I don't like. My gut kind of tells me it doesn't really make sense for them to try it again. Obviously it failed. Even if it was something real, I feel like people would just be like, shut up, we don't want to hear it. A lot of people, even the people that took a lot of the shots who are now very much aware that they were duped, but don't say it out loud. They just stopped taking them quietly, as we all saw, right? So I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it'll be something different. I hope anyway, and I hope it'll be something that we can easily identify. But as I just highlighted before, this worries me because this is still happening. This was posted as of June 2nd. It was actually a letter from May 16th from the Mayo Clinic. And it says they rejected a lung transplant due to a lack of full COVID vaccination. And as the Perpetual Shadow Ban writes, what's even considered full? I mean, that's actually shockingly stupid to read what they're doing there, because as he rightly points out, from state to state, it was different. From 2 to 4, the 2 plus the new bivalent, or none plus the original. I mean, it was all over the map. It's not even talking about the world. So if the idea was that it was either 2 from the very beginning, which even based on their information, was your immunity is gone after months, if not right in the beginning. And then, of course, you have an entire immune system problem forever. Or you're supposed to take the new bivalent one, then plus another one. And then either way you look at this, to pretend that a full vaccinated person is somehow identifiable right now this is about politics. And they're rejecting this person who needs a lung transplant because they haven't taken something they don't need, that it's actually far more dangerous for them, for their lungs included. That's crazy. Now, don't forget some points that we'll include again today we've talked about many different times. This is a January 2023 peer-reviewed study from Science Direct, just to make sure we understand that the peer-reviewed leading science from the Ioannidis group on this topic, that this hasn't been retracted. There's nothing new after this that I can see that's done this extensive of a, I mean, this is the reality, guys. This is where this was left. Age-stratified infection fatality rate of COVID-19. Very important points here. The average infection fatality rate, I just read this actually, it's more, at a global level, this one just breaks down each age group, which is important because realizing under 19 is 0.0003%, shockingly less than the flu or damn near anything. But reading the general one, the most important, at a global level, pre-vaccination, right? Before anybody's got this is before everything. Infection fatality rate may have been as low as 0.03 and 0.07, both less than the flu, for 59 and 69 under, respectively. The most important part, I think, is 94% of the global population is younger than 70. 94% of the world is in that category of 0.03 to 0.07. Less than the flu, 0.1. I mean, shockingly. So the point is that this is exactly what we were always saying. This is less than the flu. It's not dangerous. And that's even, you can argue that's not even there. In any case, they're hyping something that is now less than that because this was the beginning. And it's only gotten, as they just told you, less dangerous, but more spreading. They're doing this for the sniffles. And you could die from the thing they're giving you to treat the sniffles. They're giving you something that can cause lasting heart problems, blood clots, brain issues, prions disease. I mean, for crying out loud, this has got to be one of the most dangerous things I've ever looked at. And they're giving it for you to something that the science shows, the trust the science discussion shows is not dangerous. I mean, in the sense that, anything can be, but this, based on what they're hyping it, the benefits outweigh the risks. The benefits do not outweigh the risks when it comes to the injection. As well as the fact that this important study from June 2022 shows you the risks of the injection. Innate immune suppression. Some people have been dealing with this ever since. Getting sick constantly, having all sorts of autoimmune or immune suppression, all sorts of things. This one's about specifically innate immune suppression. Meaning, of course, autoimmune versus immune suppression is underactive versus overactive. In any case, it's both very dangerous. And as it says, the highlights, mRNA vaccines promote sustained synthesis of the spike protein, something we were telling you right in the beginning, not because we guessed, but because we listened to experts and we looked at the science they were ignoring. Compared it to the other conversation, but of course, based on the trial data and what we're seeing, because we were looking at that too, going back to Forbes covering it in 2020, which is why we knew that the data was not, they didn't even try to see that if it stopped transmission. Tal Zach's on the record even said that if we were paid more, we could have done that. And then it breaks in 2022 because they talk about it in, I think Rue asked it in the Parliament conversation, which was good. They talked about it, but it was a very old information to those watching this platform. The protein is neurotoxic and impairs DNA repair mechanisms. Oh, and the sustained synthesis, right? The spike protein continues to get made. It's not just in your shoulder muscle. All these things that we were breaking down long before most were out there talking about it. Spike protein is neurotoxic. Suppression of type 1 interferon responses result in impaired innate immunity, which means you get sicker. Whether or not it's COVID or whatever you want to call it, your body is primed to get sick. Then you're wearing a mask that increases your risk of illness and everything. And even the flu shot pushed before the COVID-19 conversation, which the Pentagon study themselves showed an increased risk of general illness, specifically coronavirus in one case, because you took the flu shot before this. All this is on the record. It's all science and peer-reviewed. The mRNA vaccines potentially cause increased risk to infections and disease, cancers. There it is. Codon optimization results in G-rich mRNA that has unpredictable complex effects. And we've talked about that later. That's one we haven't really focused on with this study because this study came out before that topic was really something we were talking about. But the codon optimization, right? We talked about that specifically, was one of the changes to the newer shots. They said, oh, it's nothing. It's nothing. Well, yeah, it is. It's something. It's something. Now, here's what's interesting too, by the way. Did you look at what's going on here, guys? For those in the podcast, this is the Wayback Machine. And I tried to use this just to make sure we had that way back version of this. And it's the same study, innate immunity. So this is the same study we just looked at. Wayback Machine is adding its own notices now. Context about this provided by Lead Stories. Are you kidding me? Read that. It'll make you laugh out loud. Guess what? Context matching provided by Google Fact Check Markup Tool. Why in the world are they doing that? Probably because they got forced to. This is an archive. So now you're inserting your fact check bullet points over an archive page. That's the whole point. I mean, we're stepping into some dangerous time, as you guys are all very well aware. Now, there's a couple important newer points around the COVID-19 shot angle of this, which, by the way, you've heard from us and people like Tess Lowry and plenty of others, Dr. Tess Lowry. She says, we have reached out to the Telegraph journalist to provide evidence on COVID vaccine harms. It's saying that COVID vaccine pharmacovigilance reports concluded in June 2022 that the number of and severity of adverse events reported on international pharmacovigilance databases were sufficient to indicate a recall of these products, which, of course, we've only seen now AstraZeneca, and they kind of pretend it wasn't really a recall, even though I think that was all designed. I said that very early, if you remember. Both AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson were far less dangerous than the mRNA versions, but they seem to focus on those ones more. I think that was part of the plan, if you want to ask me honestly, but I don't know. I can't prove that. But either way, the mRNA, Pfizer, Moderna are the most dangerous things that we're talking about today. So what she's highlighting is that they reached out to him because this is what the Telegraph wrote on June 4th. This is while they're putting the new things out, right? They're now updating the new shots. It's the same mRNA platform with all the same problems. They're just tweaking the instructions are given. It still has the same mRNA platform issues, the same lipid nanoparticle issues, the same spike protein issues. These are dangerous. But here's what the Telegraph says on June 4th. COVID vaccines could be partly to blame for the rise in excess deaths since the pandemic. Oh my God, they're finally acknowledging a fraction of that. Could be partly, maybe, to blame for the thing that we all know it's causing. Come on. Obviously, this is what's happening. There's never been a more statistically aligned issue I've ever in my lifetime. The location, and I'm not saying that would mean that. I will say that the evidence, in my opinion, 100% that's what's causing excess death. 100%. And that's what's causing the large part of it. I guarantee some of that is attributed to other issues. That's my opinion. And then I would say that I think the data overwhelmingly points in that direction. But then, of course, being objective, I can't say that I can prove that's what's happening, other than I think pointing to data, which, like at some point you get to a point where you say, yeah, that is proving that. But again, irritatingly objective. I think there's a line where I just think it's important today to go far in the other direction. But in any case, clearly the COVID shots, the places that were highly vaccinated during COVID-19 are all the places that are almost in perfect alignment with the shots being given and the excess death. The places that were less vaccinated, less excess death. It's very simple. And what are the vaccines causing? Heart problems, myocarditis, heart attacks, blood clots, strokes, brain issue. I mean, for crying out loud, it's the easiest thing to see in the world. Oh, well, there's another collapsing athlete, but we don't know. We're baffled. Either way, it's important to recognize that as that's happening, or rather as they're rolling out new shots, they're admitting at least a fraction of it. Well, it could be to blame. I mean, even that is a win, even though what they're doing with this kind of reporting, just like with Israel, is trying to give you a fraction, a little steam release valve. Is that enough? Will you let it go if we halfway point to it? No, we won't. But it's still a win, and we still take it and go, yep, we knew it, just like we said, but it's more than that, and we're going to keep hounding you until you say the full story, which they never will, usually, that those things are causing excess death around the world, and it's the most obvious part of the whole conversation. You're not following Tess Lowry, Dr. Tess Lowry, I recommend you do. Sophia Dahl highlights another important part. Now, this is a Canadian researcher, I understand it, but I believe it's about Philippine information. She's at the Philippine House of Representatives. Explosive findings have been revealed. The Philippine House of Representatives committee investigation into hundreds of thousands of excess deaths believed to be linked to the COVID vax. The committee heard that not only have there been hundreds of thousands of excess deaths since COVID-19 vax rollout, but there has also been a decline in nearly 1 million births since the country. Don't forget, that's the other side of this. It's killing people, but it's also causing infertility, birth problems, neonatal death, premature. Scotland threw it all under the rug, said, we're not going to look at it because vaccine hesitancy. I don't know how they're not all in prison for something that blatant, but this is what she was saying on the record.
I've been monitoring the deaths reported by the PSA covering 2021, 2022, and now 2023. I'd like to update on.
Actually, it's just the Canadian Independent, I guess, that broke this, but she doesn't sound like she's from the Philippines, but in any case, the Canadian Independent is where the credit goes for breaking this clip out there.
The latest excess deaths in the Philippines. Okay, since we had in 2021, we had 43.2% excess deaths. However, there was additional data given to Congressman Dan from the PSA that increased the excess deaths. It's higher than has been published. So there was additional data given. So we actually have 43.9% excess deaths. Okay, this is just very quickly, this is our birth data, and it starts at the top from 2019, and it shows that we have had a loss of babies every single year since the pandemic has started. So 2019 was our last normal birth year. And the last line at the bottom is 2023, and we can see that our births are even lower this year. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is showing a cumulative loss of births since 2000 up to 2023 in the current data. The baseline is the 2015 to 2019 annual data. And if we look at this figure up to September of 2023, because the data is not complete after that, we have lost nearly 1 million Filipino babies who have not been born over the pandemic years. Next slide, please.
Now, they love to attribute that to all sorts of other things. And certainly there's going to be some level of effect for, any number of other things they've always listed off. But you can't pretend like that dramatic of a decline, along with excess death, are not the most obvious thing in the world. And that's why so many of these doctors and scientists have been really woken up by this in a real sense, right? Like that they even ones that were maybe even not fully seeing the COVID-19 conversation are now standing back and going, my God, like this is statistically obvious. And it's causing people to really get, and I think it's a positive thing, even if it's based on a terrible thing that happened, that it's shaking people free. Same with the same thing I say about the Israel-Gaza conversation. It's just impossible not to see how obvious these things are. And I think it attributed to the fact that they're losing control for a lot of different reasons. At least I hope that. But in any case, I think more people every day are finding it impossible not to acknowledge what this is, along with a lot of other things.
This is the death data. The very big spike are the deaths in 2021, which started in March of 2021, immediately consecutive with the start of the vaccine rollout. And the very big spike in deaths that we see in July and August is actually consecutive with the rollout of the Janssen vaccines. There was a big spike in deaths exactly concurrent with that. So 2022, we had lower deaths, but the deaths were still higher than 2020 by around 8%, 8 to 9%. 2023, our data is still incomplete, but the deaths in 2023 are already nearly 10% higher than 2022. So a 10% excess deaths would be considered a black swan event. You would not expect that. But we have had consecutive years of excess deaths since 2021. And next slide.
I'll leave it. That's about half the video. You guys can watch the rest of it. It's exactly what you might expect. I mean, it's unreal. And here is an important thing to realize. And just so it's clear, that I think we've made this clear many times over. I mean, even as she pointed, Johnson & Johnson, there's a lot of angles to this. All these things are dangerous. And it's not just, just the spike protein, just the lipid nanoparticle, just nanoparticles in general. It's all of these things combined are like, this is one of the reasons why a lot of us make the point that it almost seems statistically impossible for someone to have accidentally made this thing as dangerous as it is. The other way to say that is it was designed to be deadly. But I think what we're talking about here with this article is that those are dangerous in and of themselves. But the problem is, as one of these peer-reviewed studies found, it's actually the platform itself, the mRNA platform that's specifically driving the myocarditis problem. That's on top of the things that are being caused on everything else. So the point is that it's just by making it right now, as they approve a new shot with a new variant, acting like now that'll be different, because they disregard the fact that the platform, the pieces themselves are the problem. Why? Because an entire industry has been built around this new experimental direction. And it's even admitted now that they jammed that forward right in the beginning because they wanted that to be the direction. So you could even argue, I don't think this, but that the one thing that went wrong was they were just so interested in making this new direction work that they forced that through. And that's where all the problems came from. I think it's much more nefarious and complicated than that. But they'll say at some point, they're still holding to the mRNA platform plug and play direction. And even though the peer-reviewed science has shown that in and of itself is the problem, or one of the main problems. So here, horrifyingly enough, is what somebody in Congress is saying. And this is June 2nd, when this is posted anyway. So this is a new video of a person in Congress just basically stating everything the opposite of what's really going on in regard to the COVID shots and COVID-19.
Clarify some of the truly insane attacks on vaccines and just what happened during the pandemic that we heard a little bit earlier today, which I found to be really wild. I just want to reiterate that during the pandemic, we lost 1.3 million American lives. In my city alone, we lost almost 1,300 lives back home in California, in the city of Long Beach. And
let's not forget, by the way, that we've heard directly from our own U.S. Congress and our people representatives of local governments saying that, well, if they die in a car accident and they go in, they get tested for COVID, that goes to the COVID-19 shot, or, COVID-19 case. We were told people could die in motorcycle accidents after they got tested, and that goes down as COVID-19 death. These are very real to this very day, guys. Whether they employ all those things or not is up to them, which is ridiculous even when you think about it, say it out loud. I mean, shouldn't it be consistent? Yes. That's how they made this all seem so muddled as well. But those numbers are still pointed to, despite the fact that we showed you they combine flu and pneumonia with the COVID numbers, that they have those flimsy the PCR testing. I mean, every which way, this was, at the very least, embellished a hell of a lot, if not completely made up.
And we know that many of the folks that we lost would have lived if they had had access to the vaccine.
Oh, would they? And we know that? Why are these people so childish? Why are these people in major positions of power so completely broad and stroking and assumptive? Because they're politicians. They're not there to give. They don't. I think these people are, if not completely compromised, are in it for their own interests. That's what politicians are today. It shouldn't. I don't think that's the way they always are. Maybe. And if they didn't have access to it, I mean, what are you talking about? Where did they live? In a cave somewhere? Everywhere in the world, not only had access to it, but most cases were forced. And he's now trying to rewrite the reality as if they just couldn't find it somewhere. I mean, this is lunacy. And these people, maybe he actually believes that, which speaks to my point about how ridiculous these people are and aren't actually the ones making decisions.
Or had been vaccinated. We know that for a fact. We know the success of vaccines. And
we know it for a fact, he says.
Certainly today with more data, we know how effective they've been.
Think about that. With the new data, we know how effective they've been. Do you think he believes that?
What's concerning now, as we know, is as early childhood vaccinations are reaching new lows. We're having other diseases come forward like measles and other diseases we are now not addressing.
Oh, yes. He just mumbled his way past that nonsense. Measles and other stuff and, whatever. Actually, what's really happening is if you can actually take the data and look, oh my God, well visits are down shockingly for people that aren't getting their opening shots, or in a number of overlaps. And just take a look at James Lyons Weiler and other vax versus unvax studies that almost every single time you look at one of these, you'll never find them from the CDC or anywhere else, because it shows you this every time, that the children are exponentially more healthy without the shot they're getting throughout their adolescent years. Now, again, that's not to say that if they were done right, with the right intentions, with the right, that they could be different, but I'm just stating the obvious facts. And I believe that the actual intent behind these, or lack of concern for the side effect, or whatever else, are one of the largest reasons. But it very well could be that it's all a big scam and are lying in the first place. We should be genuinely asking that. But I just don't think I know that. My point would be is if what we know about these are correct, it's a big if, I would argue it's the intent behind them and the lack of concern for the outcome, or maybe experimentation. In any case, you can see the very clear positive effects of these children not doing that. And what do they point to? A random hype story about measles or other things that he can't even remember to say right there. Which, by the way, in most cases you look to and it's go, well, didn't you tell us that these were eradicated because of the vaccine? And now because they take them, they just magically pop back up? That doesn't seem to make much sense. But in any case, this is about lie upon lie upon lie.
Because all of this vaccine denial that is happening, unfortunately, not just across this country, but also here in Congress and in this chamber, vaccine hesitancy outside of what happened to COVID-19 is going to cause this country great harm.
Yeah, it's also called freedom. It's also called your right to make your own decisions. But, they love to go, you have a right to do this, but then if you don't do it, and that's usually how it starts, right? As we saw during the COVID conversation, first it's, which shouldn't be the case anyway, where they pressure and they belittle and they attack. And then eventually it becomes forced in many cases, like we already saw. But the idea that you get outward pressure from your government to do something that's supposed to be your choice because it's somehow a greater good for society, even though that's not actual what's happening, it's very frustrating. And I think as we can point to many, many, many very high-credentialed, highly respected experts that will tell you. There's people like, I'm forgetting his, Pierre Corey, who has been going through this journey himself. And he's made that clear that if at first he recognized the COVID shot was dangerous, and that has opened him up to this larger conversation. What about the rest of them? And it's the same kind of journey where you can clearly see that he has every reason to question whether they've just been lying about those two, which doesn't have to mean that they're all dangerous. They always will be. Again, that's a very real question we should be asking. And I think it's leaning more and more in that direction. But the point is that we have every reason to ask whether or not the rest of them were also lied about, or that they were hiding other side effects. Just look at Pfizer's track record of doing exactly that. And we can't piece that together. People like this have a lot of reasons in their pocket to not piece that together.
And instead of doing the responsible thing, earlier today we had folks on the other side attack vaccines with, in my opinion, conspiracy theories and with treatments that we know are ineffective and have shown not to work.
Oh, yeah, like ivermectin is what he's talking about, or the rest of them, even though that's literally the opposite of what the data shows, and they've all been grudgingly forced to admit that. But see, this is about a grandstanding moment to make these statements so it all goes in the record. You realize that right as he's saying, the FDA was rolled in front of a court to admit they lied about the ivermectin conversation. Or I can go off forever about this, but even then, I'm just like I said at the beginning, I don't like the idea of supporting any of these drugs. They're all big pharma drugs at the end of the day. And I think that natural stuff is most likely better in my personal opinion, but you can make your own choices. But he's here saying this now. Oh, there's Instagram. Censored my show. I knew it was going to happen soon enough. Thank you for those that were there. Reach out to them. Let them know. Instagram censors Ryan's show every single day. Back to the clip.
We also know this is not just a matter of personal choice. Across the country, there are millions of people who don't have the choice and who cannot get vaccinated because they might be too young, they might be immunocompromised, or have other underlying health conditions. And so America's high vaccination rates is something that has helped our country for so long that the FDA has been so involved with.
You know what I love about that ridiculous claim? And I made this point then. Who did they pressure to get the shots the most during COVID? Immunocompromised, the elderly. People that can't get it. Like, so historically, the people that were most, who are, like he just said, we have to get everybody else because those people can't get them. Well, then why did you force them to get it first? Why did you make entire cases about why children, elderly, and immunocompromised should get them first? Because none of this is all just not talking points. And on top of that, the idea is that you're supposed to give everybody these shots so they can be protected. Like, this is a ridiculous mindset. First of all, that's kind of counterintuitive to freedom and your personal choice. But natural immunity has always been the reality in these conversations, and we can prove that what you're giving them to keep them safe, in fact, removes that from them. You're causing things to be, every part of the story. The injections they gave caused the new variants, if you believe that's what's happening. These shots they gave them caused these things to spread, caused more things to happen. Or even if we're just talking about the spike protein itself that does shed, that can get more people sick. All that is part of that conversation. He wants you to think, just take this and you're doing your part. Meanwhile, the people that didn't are the ones that are actually keeping you safe.
And it's very concerning that our vaccination rates and our vaccine process is being attacked.
Yeah, I'm sure it's concerning to him because his money is going. I mean, let's not forget, these people have lobbyists, whether it's AIPAC and the Israel conversation or Big Pharma in 1,000 different ways that influence what they say. Now, as I said, because this is absurd, like it's a cartoon, what he just did. Is he feckless, or uninformed, or compromised? You guys decide for yourselves. But it's pretty shocking, isn't it? After even what we just went over, the Telegraph just wrote an article saying this may be the cause for excess death. And here he is just pushing the complete opposite narrative. Here's another clip from Camus. It says, when you realize the so-called anti-vaxxers were right all along, this is Annette Bosworth, MD. And I'll just play it for you. She talks about the spike proteins are not supposed to be inside us. Well, yeah, this is the point. I mean, it's amazing that some people are still actually arguing the basic original narrative. It stays in your shoulder muscle. It only produces one. I mean, even the Red Cross still to this day argues that it doesn't enter your bloodstream. You know, despite all the peer-reviewed science that literally cites it going into your bloodstream, or the endless amount of autopsies now that show it all over every organ. But the Red Cross knows better, right? Because they're clearly compromised.
As you look at some of the images from people who have autopsies from death due to myocarditis, I wonder if this is, yeah, here we go. This spike proteins are found in the cells of all human heart cells with spike proteins inside the muscles of these patients. Again, spike proteins are not supposed to be inside us at all. The people who had COVID didn't have spike proteins found in their cardiac tissues. The people who had,
it could just be because it wasn't COVID at all, or something completely else, or something else. But it's important if you think about, let's just assume you think it is real and you think that's what's happening. So the very thing they're telling you is super dangerous, that you have to get the shot to protect you from, wasn't doing the dangerous thing the shot was doing, which is putting the spike protein, the most dangerous part, inside your body, all over your body. In fact, producing instructions, delivering them to turn your body into a factory that produces those spike proteins. How is it? I mean, it's actually the most simple thing in the world, just that one part to think about. If the spike protein is dangerous, which even the Salk Institute showed you, and I'll bring it up next, as actually circular, or I think it's, I don't off the top of my head remember the name of the actual journal that put it out. But the spike protein itself is dangerous. It's cytotoxic and it can get you sick, and it's the most dangerous part. I mean, I guess that's hard, you know, who knows if the mRNA and so on, but they're dangerous. And the actual illness didn't even do that. And you're giving me something that makes your body completely pump these things out on a regular basis. I mean, that's one of the most obvious things in the world to see. And I think this was Let me grab that really quickly. This is just something you remember. I played this many times. I remember I played this clip before the COVID-19 illusion, right in the beginning, because this is a Forbes article, I think, or at least a clip with a Pfizer lab guy in the back, literally telling you what they were all super excited about.
Wall Street and biotechnology companies have been very excited about this idea. And what essentially it is trying to hack the cells in the body in order to make them into drug factories.
So we're going to pretend like it was a whoopsie? Literally, they're going, we're super excited about making your body produce these things. And then they go, oh, no, it won't go there and it won't produce them. Or that's what they were trying to do and they lied about it. I mean, this is why it was the most obvious thing in the world.
The vaccinations, the ones who had this messenger RNA that made a protein, and then they made the protein and didn't have the off button. Well, they're now found at autopsy in the cells of cardiac tissues. And here are that sounds ridiculous. It sounds like something I wouldn't even believe until you start looking at the autopsies and wondering, hey, what part in this did I play?
And see, what an interesting statement, because that's the hardest part about the controlled medical society, right? That they just adhere to what their authorities say. I mean, it's like anything else. And the point is that why would anybody go, that's crazy? It's perfectly scientifically possible. And obviously it comes down to the idea that you reject what you're preconditioned to think is somehow outside in the realm of conspiracy. That's what the whole term was created for you to justifiably in your mind dismiss things they didn't want you to talk about. And yet she said it herself, right? Before this, she probably, or any number of these doctors who open their mind to the COVID-19 risk and the shot and things around that. And in the first, like when this first started, were then unable to acknowledge other things that were like peripheral to the conversation. But they like Pierre Corey and the other vaccine conversation, right? But it broadens out. But we all have these blocks. It's not an attack on her or anybody else. We all have those because they're preconditioned to think X, Y, and Z you're not supposed to think, or rather that's what dumb people think, or this is only what smart people think. And you fall in those traps where you tell yourself, well, I'm not. That's what I am. So I'm not going to believe that. It's a trick. Consider everything all the time while questioning it equally. It's very simple.
And how do you say, I'm sorry to all of you that have been putting comments in my videos for like a year. Take a look at this. Take a look at this. And I said, okay, they're just chirping again. And my good friend Colonel Auk, who told me from the very beginning, be careful, be careful. Look what's happening. This is sneaky. Why are they holding this back? And he questioned everything. Now he questions everything. So it's like the boy who cries wolf that I should have been paying attention when he cried wolf this time.
How do you, see, this is what's infuriating to me. Clearly she was I find it hard to believe that anybody with a brain could have not seen this as, early. The facts were all there. So it becomes a willfully ignorant situation, even if you don't realize you're doing it. But my point is, what do you mean? Questioning everything compared with the boy who cries wolf? Like, this is how it's crazy to me that we're in a position where the idea that questioning everything, including from people you trust and authorities, is somehow perceived as crazy. Or the boy who cries wolf? It's not that you deny anything. You question everything and consider all of them. It's just about due diligence, guys. And these are doctors and scientists who are pushing back on the idea of questioning everything. I'm not talking about her in a broad sense. We saw a lot of that. I just don't know where that block comes in. It seems counterintuitive to what they pretend they are.
But shame on me when there were places that this information was more readily available.
So good for her. Right? Good for her. Just because I overlapped that with criticism, I wasn't directing it at her. Even if she was missing this, the fact that she's now come around to state that takes courage to be able to admit that. Many of them still fail to do that. Or you can go the whole Scott Adams route and just be like, you're wrong, even though I was right. That whole thing where I'm right, even though I was wrong kind of game. But that's important. Spike protein all throughout your body. This is the obvious, self-evident, objective, provable reality, and we're still going forward. It's pretty alarming. Now here, all in the Red Cross point, just because I still think that's mind-blowing. As of September 2022, we don't label them because it does not enter your bloodstream. And I posted this all the way back in January 2023, and I come in here every time I talk about it and retweet it again. And this one that I did the same thing. All these studies clearly show that it does stay, it's detected in the heart. This was the earliest one that says it stays up to 28 days in your blood. There's no other conclusion that they're dishonest. They know this and they're hiding it for whatever reason. Call them out. That's disgusting. And they're hurting people by not talking about that. Oh, did I include that? Hold on. Make sure I put it in the show notes. All right. And then, of course, we have an important development on this side of, I think, what's worth mentioning at least. Daily Mail highlights that, and you guys have seen the Fauci. I mean, I think there's, as I said on the AM Wake Up, I think there's good things that came out of Fauci talking about this in Congress. That some of that did reach new people, which I think is good, but these always feel like manipulations to me. What's going to happen? You think he's going to get in trouble? You think he's going to go to jail? I highly doubt it. These things seem like release valves. They seem like things to put it to bed. So yeah, we made him look bad. So is that over now? And usually it's all a bunch of half-truths and lacking source material as usual. But this says, Dr. Anthony Fauci confesses he, quote, made up COVID rules, which obviously we proved that in the very beginning, along with a lot of people are taking the arbitrary, like the psychological manipulation conversation coming from, the way that they would psychologically, like Guantanamo Bay kind of stuff, isolation, like that's what this really aligned with. There wasn't any real scientific background. Why 6 feet? We talked about this. A lot of us did. But here's the problem. Just because it's true does not mean that that statement is accurate, because it doesn't appear to be, which I think is part of the manipulation. And this whole game we play that, well, he didn't really say that, but we know it's true. So just why are you attacking it? Like, we can acknowledge that these things are accurate without saying it's okay for them to state this in a way that's dishonest or completely false. This is my problem with this. This is the two-party paradigm stuff. And if you're defending the idea that they should state this, even though it's not actually what was stated, not exactly, or put it in quotes, even though he didn't say that, the problem is that creates the allowance to be frivolous with the facts. As long as it aligns with what you think, and that is a two-party illusion thing. And guess what? You're acting just like the corporate media. Let that sink in. The point is, as this person says, and I'm not on this person with his Ukraine flag is not somebody I'm on supporting, but he goes, he actually didn't say that. The article you linked doesn't say he said that. And sadly, if you look at the actual breakdown, it doesn't appear that he did. What he did say, what he claimed, seems to completely insinuate that. And even though either way, that is the truth. They completely arbitrarily made up most of this stuff. But here's what it actually says in the breakdown, saying that the messaging was about 6 foot distancing and the distance it needed to be. He goes, I don't recall. Asked where it came from for studies. And he goes, it sort of just appeared. I don't recall like a discussion of whether it should be 5 or 6 or whatever. It was just that 6 foot is, and it's kind of like this, clearly admitting that it was arbitrary, guys. But this person goes, I don't care whether it said verbatim or not. I have a problem with that. You should care about that. It matters, because just because it aligns with what you think, this is like the Twitter files game, guys. We're falling into these traps, which allow you to ignore the important parts of this. If it's quoted, then he damn well better have said it. That's a corporate platform. And the point is, this is a problem. So I think this is a subtle thing. Many people probably disagree with me, but we need to be careful. We fall into these traps where we're conflating things. And on top of that, it becomes an easy thing to dismiss for people that don't want to see it, because they go, well, it's not even what he said. But it did say, quote, just an empiric decision that wasn't based on data or even that data could be accomplished, right? So like I said, it is the reality. But what he's saying there is not necessarily that it was, it's not important to get into the details of it all. The point is, like, to break down what he meant by it, because I don't ultimately know what the game they're playing. The point is, they lied about this. We know that these things were arbitrarily made up and it wasn't based on science. But to claim he said he made it up, and that gets what gets spread, people make memes about it with quotes, you're getting tricked. But it goes just as bad, maybe even worse. Wasn't based on data. Yeah, I agree that it's similar, and the point is the same direction. But all of us, if we care about the truth, should not be going, whatever, as long as it goes in the right direction. That's two-party paradigm stuff. The left and the right, and people are falling for it. And so down here goes, so he didn't make it up. You see my point? This guy is, just desperate to make Fauci not the bad guy. But that's the point. That's how that works. Not that we should care about these manipulating people, but overall, what we need to care about is the facts. Not the screenshot from Twitter and assume that the right guy said it, but knowing the facts and understanding it and proving it. So I think that's deliberate, guys. I really do. I think it's about trapping us. But getting into the bird flu conversation, which is also a big part of this, because honestly, it seems at the moment to be the most likely hype direction, or the next one to be kind of, if that's the way you think it's going to go. But Toby Rogers points out something important, and I'll go to the actual article. He goes, the dude who supposedly died of bird flu in Mexico had chronic kidney disease, type 2 diabetes, and, quote, had no history of exposure to poultry. So he goes, oh, so basically they made up the bird flu part because of course they did. And he goes, oh, and he died 6 weeks ago, but they're just telling us now. This is all true. I'll show you next, which is ridiculous. And of course, Chris Martinson says a cycle threshold of 57, presumably. If you remember the conversation there, the point is that cycle threshold of 40 above or even 30 something above was guaranteed to be rife with false positives. That's why when they did the first testing, it was like an average of 40 to 40 plus. And then when they did the post-vaccination PCR testing, it had magically dropped down to 28, which we proved and nobody wanted to talk about, because that proved to you that they were trying to change the way the outcome was using the cycle threshold to make this post-vaccination ones look like they were better than the ones before, even though it was all arbitrary and manipulative. But here's the actual article from Reuters. This is from June 5th. The person with bird flu died in Mexico, WHO says. Now, again, first point, died in April. It's just strange that now it's coming out. I think it's because it's aligning it with the rest of the conversation. But it says scientists said the case is related to an outbreak of H5N1 bird flu that has so far infected 3 dairy farm workers related to, or so say it's unrelated to, excuse me. So this is the first point I think is interesting. And I keep making this argument. So we're to believe this is something that is magically changing in the same ways, in different, like we're told throughout COVID, right, that this is some kind of a unique thing, even though it seemed to all of a sudden happen like every 30 seconds. But the idea that this is changing in the same way to infect another animal at the same time at different parts in the world that are unrelated. I mean, how much of this are we supposed to just take on credit here, guys? This doesn't make sense. And the idea that this is already spread to humans from animals in multiple cases around the world, but then doesn't change from there, doesn't infect other humans, that's either not happening or it's not dangerous. And it says Mexico's health ministry also said in a statement the source of infection had not been identified. So we don't know where it came from. He died in April. The victim had no history of exposure to poultry or other animals, but had multiple underlying medical conditions and has been bedridden for weeks. Bedridden. And it goes on to say, as he highlighted, for other reasons prior to the onset of acute symptoms. He says he has chronic kidney disease and type 2 diabetes. Okay, so you can easily see that you can give this guy a PCR test and be like, oh, he has the thing that we're testing for, and ignore all the other things. I mean, come on. Certainly could be the case. Either way, the idea that they're hyping all of this around the idea of bird flu, while all over the world we have these like examples of from bird flu, mind you, that's now suddenly infecting cows, and in the dairy farm area it's infected a couple of humans, but it doesn't spread from there. Like, I mean, I've talked to epidemiologists more than enough throughout the COVID-19 conversation to understand that this doesn't, or virologists for that matter, this doesn't make sense. This is about, and the only thing, of course, you can stand back and go, well, maybe it's just a new thing that's changing and acting differently. Certainly possible. Or if you're going to, Occam's razor the whole thing, how about the fact that they're using a PCR test to test where they want to and finding what they want? When they look, they find it. And what do you know? I guarantee you right now, if you just PCR tested everywhere, you'd suddenly be like a bird flu pandemic. That's what we're seeing. Now, here's an interesting overlap to this. Great Game India highlights in the lengthy report, Ron Fouchier, PhD, I believe that's how it's pronounced. I've never pronounced it out loud before, but it looks like it, of Erasmus Medical Center in the Netherlands, describe how they used a combination of genetic engineering and serial infection of ferrets to create a mutant H5N1 virus that can spread among ferrets without direct contact. Oh, 2012. Gee, I wonder if that might be related. Certainly possible. Or the idea that they just genetically engineer or gain a function everything they're dealing with. And the point is, these things were created. Doesn't mean it's the same thing, but we can ask that question. But here's what Peter McCullough highlights. If bird flu starts spreading human to human, and he posted this as of June 1st, you can thank these two gain-of-function researchers for their financial sponsors and their sponsors. They have been working on it for years. So, of course, you could argue, and this Professor Ron Fouchier, the same guy she just highlighted from 2012, Yoshihiro Kuwaiko, PhD. Of course, you could argue that it's just coincidental. Or we can argue that this is another thing they're playing with. That could be an accident in that case, one step further, that got released on accident, or that could be used, or it could be, I mean, the point is, how are we still allowing this? playing with things just like they highlighted here. Now, this is from 2012, but it's still happening. If you're looking at the dates on these reports, guys, we're talking about gain of function research to make this thing more dangerous. To do what? To make something to protect you from that? Should that 1 in a billion chance the same thing happen elsewhere? That's, I mean, the likelihood that that would be the very thing, if it's even what, I mean, it's the same conversation. The bottom line is we should not be allowing gain of function research like this, even of their own admission that these things, the leaks and the risks and so on. Kind of blows your mind, doesn't it? This is even still happening. And the people like Dr. Peter McCullough are highlighting, look, if this happens, look to these people right here who are working on making this thing a dangerous and human-to-human spread. Dr. Claire Craig highlights, and this is actually pretty ridiculous to me. I'm convinced that Birx here and the rest of them are just playing their roles. I mean, the way that she came out at the right time and made different arguments that seemed to put her as like the truth teller. Now she is doing, well, guess what? Test every cow in the country. What do you think they'll find? Exactly what I just said. Dr. Claire Craig highlights virus hunting, which I agree with, will lead to novel viruses, panic, and harm. Testing asymptomatic cows is lunacy. You're just doing the same game. Influenza, like SARS-CoV-2, is airborne and travels long distance, she says. Slaughtering healthy cows won't change that. Jordan Sachtel highlights, Deborah Birx says, we must test every cow in America on a weekly basis. For bird flu, why wouldn't we test birds? Like this jump to, I mean, none of this makes any logical sense. And it's not just because I don't understand it. If you break this down in the historical understandings and what we were taught and what we've said even during COVID, this doesn't line up.
We're not testing to really see how many people have been exposed and got asymptomatically infected. We should be testing every cow weekly. You can do pooled PCR. We have the technology. The great thing about America is we're incredibly innovative, and we have the ability to have these breakthroughs. We could be pool testing every dairy worker. I do believe that
pool testing every dairy worker, right? With PCR tests. Didn't we just go over this? They know what they're doing, guys. I guarantee you they know about the issue. That's why they play with the PCR cycle threshold.
There's undetected cases in humans because we're once again only tracking people with symptoms. When we did that with COVID, the virus spread throughout the Northeast undetected because it took a long time to get to the vulnerable individuals. But in the meantime, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were infected with asymptomatic or mild disease and never came to medical attention. We have to switch from symptoms to actually definitive laboratory testing. We have the capacity.
And of course, it sounds like it might be logic, right? We can't just go off symptoms. Well, we never should have just gone off symptoms. That's absurd. The game they played then was it was just so dangerous we couldn't risk it. Well, it wasn't, and they knew that. They lied. But the idea that all they're doing is using that truth to push you into another manipulation. Well, we got to just test everybody. Well, they tried that during COVID as well. It was always not the right answer. You don't just test everybody all the time. You're going to find what you're looking for, especially with a PCR test. This is concerning in so many different ways because they're creating the discussion that could lead you right back into the same manipulation. Even overlapping with a symptomatic lie. Not the fact that, I mean, I genuinely question whether that's even a real thing today based on what we went through. But the science and the studies and the peer-reviewed evidence showed that was near non-existent. There was a 10 million person study that showed there was basically zero asymptomatic in the conversation of COVID-19. But I mean, my point is even then I go, okay, well, let's ask ourselves, is it even, like, I'm not saying that you couldn't be somehow a carrier for something without being sick, but the idea that you can be sick to the point of spreading something without actually being shown to be, that doesn't make any sense. It's certainly possible, I would argue. But Ben realized that respiratory viruses, if we believe that, even Fauci would tell you spread by symptoms. So the idea that if you're somehow spreading a respiratory virus without symptoms, all of these things they add up to being inconsistent at the very least. Now I'm going to show you this again because I haven't talked about it in a long time. Just recognizing that in 2011, even the WHO is calling out the same thing they're doing now. The title of it was Health is More Than Influenza. And it simply says the repeated pandemic health scares caused by, guess what? H5N1. The same thing they're doing now. And H1N1 are part of a culture of fear. Oh, would you look at that? It says worst case thinking replaced balanced risk assessment. And it says, of course, they led to the precautionary stocking of largely useless antivirals and irrational vaccine policies. Yeah, it's crazy, the WHO, right? Of course, these people are no longer part of that, and the new guard is in place. But it says in both pandemics of fear, the exaggerated claims of severe public health threats stemmed primarily from disease advocacy by influenza experts like Birx, like Fauci. In the highly competitive market of health governance, the struggle for attention, budgets, and grants is fierce. The pharmaceutical industry and the media only react to this welcome boon. Yeah. If you haven't seen this, it's probably blowing your... The point is, I've talked about this 1,000 times. Other points in this were saying where was the main point? Resources are scarce, need to be allowed. Disease experts wish to capture public attention and sway resource allocation decisions in favor of the disease of their interest. Now, the point is on top of this is that we also, I won't get into it now just for time, but the HHS around the same time made the same point, which highlighted the fact that they literally laid out the idea, we're not selling enough vaccines. How do we do that? Well, we hype the fear. And this is basically what they said out loud under the guise that most of them probably thought it was in the best interest of you. But the point was that we could prove that it was dishonest. They knew it wasn't, because overall, everybody at the time was highlighting this, or large elements of it, and it just got ignored. So now, after all of that, here's Finland now offering the bird flu vaccine to select groups of people. A global first. So right now, while we're this is benign based on everything we're seeing, and even knowing that they already hyped this before, pandemics of fear, and we know it's happening again for whatever reason. The idea that they're going to offer this at a time when it's not even happening that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this today, because that does concern me. This is from June 5th. Finland to offer bird flu vaccine to select groups of people. It says Finland is preparing to offer vaccines to people at risk of exposure to an avian influenza strain spreading among farmland and wild animals, health officials there said. Well, it's not really spreading. There's been a few infections, we're told, based on PCR tests. Potentially becoming the first country to take such a step as concerns about the threat intensify. Or rather, your propaganda increases. It says the vaccine campaign will be limited, with doses set to be available to groups including poultry farmers, veterinarians, scientists who study the virus, and people who work on fur farm housing animals like mink and fox. Again, the idea that just animals in general seems like a strange thing. I'm actually on guard right now, and if you see it, let me know, for the push to use a self-spreading concept for this. Because remember, the original concept was about animals. And if you haven't seen it, we've talked about it endlessly. Even the WHO and the rest of them very, very clearly have talked about self-spreading vaccines for humans. My point is that the animal conversation is a way to kind of get that moving. And they've already been talking about that going back to even the bats. Don't forget that, I'm forgetting his name. Hold on. Ralph Barrick from North Carolina University, Chapel Hill. And I'll just grab the other one since I brought it up. So the point was, in the first discussion of this, I asked the question, or just pointed out, U.S. funded research on, quote, coronavirus-induced myocarditis, it's right out of Ralph Barrick's research from North Carolina University, Chapel Hill. It's 90s forward. He's working on rabbits that's spreading coronavirus that caused myocarditis. I mean, think about how ridiculous that is. Easy to look up. It's directly from his own research and directly from his own, what's it called? Of course, now I have to look for it and I have to find it. Where was it? Shoot, is it this one? Yes. It's from his own curriculum. Ralph Barrick. Coronavirus-induced myocarditis in rabbits. Right? I mean, there's a bunch of them in there. So the point is, I talked about that, and then the next show, we went even further. Did the U.S. government work on myocarditis-inducing virus? The answer is yes. And then work to aerosolize it? The answer is yes. It's all on their own documentation. They made this to induce coronavirus or myocarditis. Then they released it in the caves with bats in China, and in fact turned it into a self-spreading vaccine. You can look it up for yourself. I talked about it plenty of times. So back to that point, I'm worried that that will be the next discussion, to be like, okay, let's discuss this for these animals because, oh my God, it's spreading. And I think there's much less of an overlap than we realize. But it says waiting for 20,000 doses to arrive in Finland, but plan to administer them as soon as the vaccines are in the country. So the question is that offered? Right? If you're working in these farms, they're going to mandate this for them. I mean, we've already seen that door opened. If the argument is we're rushing these in to get them to people, why would they do that if it's going to be like, here, you can have it if you want? Seems like sort of a government thing. It says the decision to start providing vaccines reflects fears that people in close contact with infected animals could contract H5N1 virus themselves, which I don't know why that makes sense if we're talking about something that has not seen any human-to-human transmission. But it says the virus is, for now, not particularly adept at infecting humans. Now, what does that even mean? If it can, then it can. What's this game they're playing where it comes from the animal to, or the bird to the human, and then it stops there? To me, that's a false scenario. That's a flu that's tested with PCR that says you got the thing. That's what I'm worried about anyway. Because, I mean, I'm not there. I don't know. But the reality being, the logic of how it spreads doesn't make sense that it stops there. But it says, but scientists worry that as the virus infects more mammalian species, which again, in and of itself doesn't make sense, that it just jumps from all these different animals. It says, and if it encounters more human cells, then the higher the chances that it evolves to become more of a threat to people. Now, if you believe the idea of how these things change, and the idea that Dr. Yeadon and plenty of others argue that it takes a long time for that to actually happen, not just a couple of days or a couple of weeks like we saw during COVID-19. The Finnish campaign also comes as the U.S. faces an H5N1 outbreak, they claim, among dairy cattle. Previously, a species scientists thought weren't susceptible to the virus. But apparently the PCR test says otherwise. 3 dairy workers have had confirmed infections based on PCR test. I wouldn't call that confirmed. And although the infections were all mild and there were no signs of forward transmission to other people, the cases underscored the risk to people who have what do you mean underscored what risk? Did they die? No. Did it spread? No. So what are we even talking about? Other countries are discussing, it's all about hyping the thing, guys. It's hyping the new thing. There's a business around this. Other countries are discussing deploying H5 vaccines or are working to secure supplies. The U.S., for example, last week hired CSL Seqirus to build up the number of H5 flu vaccine doses it has available. The United States. But Finland was the first country he knew that actually planned to use them. Now it says the vaccine is to be administered in Finland is designed off a different avian influenza virus called H5N8. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I said H8N1. H5N8. Yeah. But researchers said the shot should still confer protection against H5N1. Oh, should it? I'm glad we're guessing. This is so stupid. Why would, okay, if the argument is we need this, why wouldn't you just make it for the thing you're telling us it needs? This is about selling vaccines, at least at the moment. H5N8 is a different thing, at least what we're being told, and realize that's the Seqirus we're talking about. It's the same thing the U.S. government has ready to go. Let's talk about that. Oh, here, I included those for you. Here it is. Excuse me, Seqirus. So that's what Finland's planning to use immediately and what the U.S. government has already tapped to make for them. All this money and time that your tax dollars are going into, and I'm not saying it should go into this, but they're making it for all sorts of new COVID things while they have something they're claiming is happening, but they're just going to pay for something that's for a different strain. There's either just dishonesty everywhere or there's something much darker happening behind it. So the point for the European Medicines Agency page, let's look at what Seqirus actually is. So obviously I want to know about the risks. So of course I go to this and we go, okay, let's see. Full list of side effects and restrictions. Well, see the package leaflet. Okay, let's click that and see what happens. Oh, well, that's strange. There seems to be nothing there. I'm not joking. It just says package leaflet. Very big with nothing there. It says the leaflet in every pack of medicine that contains information. Okay, so you're giving us a line of information about what a package leaflet is. That's what it is. The leaflet is here in every medicine. It contains all the information. Okay, then why do you say go to this link to look at all the side effects? Isn't that the most stupid thing in the world? Something tells me that's not by accident. But in any case, let's go to the actual page that I was able to find under annex. This is basically the summary for Sequirus. Here's a couple things I plucked out of this to make same points. Limitations of vaccine effectiveness. It says there is no immune correlate of protection established for this shot, or rather just for influenza A caused by H5 subtypes. Okay, so what it says, so it says based on humoral immune responses that after 2 doses, you may not have, they all tend to say that you may not get the immune response. But remember what we saw during COVID-19 and it was FDA speaking about the Pfizer shot. We do not have a correlate of protection. Now, if you look it up, the very phrase, what it means is proving that the response you get correlates with a level of protection. So here we are again. Why are these things even being given if we're still, you know how long this has been around? So we still haven't figured that out? How about it's because they probably don't want to look there because it probably doesn't show what they want to find. Just like with all the rest of these big pharma drugs that have complete immunity, at least in COVID across the board, but almost all of them in many cases. Act of 1986. The point is that if there's no correlate of protection, what that means is that the response you get from this doesn't necessarily prove that you're protected. They just say, well, this is the thing we need to make to protect you from this, right? And we can prove that it makes those things. Here's our antibody response. Okay, does it protect you against the thing you're telling? Well, we don't know. We assume. Or if you go up against something else that's out there where you're making the antibodies for something that's not there, which can cause an even more dangerous response. Antibody immune or antibody dependent enhancement, and all these different conversations. But, same old, guys. That's my concern about why these things are dangerous as a whole. But under contradictions, history of an anaphylactic, life-threatening reaction to the active substance. Well, that's a good one. So it has a history of having a life-threatening anaphylactic shock situation to the active substance in the shot. Benefits outweigh the risks, huh? Right? Okay, so if it's a thing that's not killing anybody, that's not even spreading, but here, take this thing quick because of something that's not hurting anybody, but you might die from this, just in case. Now, these are all broad, guys, understand. It doesn't say how common it is, but it says a history of that. We're just these are just a few things I plucked out. And here's the things I always focus on. Interactions with other medications. Now, how is it possible after all this time and how many injections are forced on your children and everybody else that they still don't do co-administration studies? Which means they don't know how this will react with the other 45 shots they give that child. There are no data on co-administration of this shot with any other vaccines. So guarantee you, just like with the flu shot and COVID, they're going to say, come in and get your flu shot. And while you're here, get the bird flu shot. Why not? Maybe we'll even combine them for you, even though we don't know what that will do. Science. Benefits outweigh the risks. Okay, fertility, pregnancy, lactation, same damn thing. No data are available. Well, all that means is they probably won't lean into it at first, but should they feel it's dangerous, they'll simply go do it anyway, like they did with COVID-19. They said, do it. It's the safe thing to do. And I routinely went to this and said, they don't even know if it's safe. They say it right there. And they're telling pregnant women to get it. And guess what? Pregnant women were some of the most affected in what happened during COVID-19. Pregnancies, excess death, lack of births. My God. But it's the same damn thing in every single conversation. Now here is the list of post-marketing surveillance. Now, what I think is crazy about this, sorry, my throat's congested, which lately seems to be common, is that they say no post-marketing surveillance data are available. This is not a new thing. So the point is, we just haven't cared to do any post-marketing surveillance. Now, that's not true, by the way. They have pharmacovigilance for all this, but they just don't tell you. The point is that they don't have on-the-record marketing surveillance. So what do? They say, well, here are, the following adverse events were reported from post-marketing surveillance with H1N1 pandemic vaccine, right? So they're simply going, we don't even know the H5N8 shot that we're giving you for H1N1. We never did any studies after the fact, but here are all the bad things that happened after the H1N1 shot. Blood and lymphatic system disorders, immune system disorders, nervous system disorders, cardiac disorders, respiratory disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, skin and subcutaneous tissue disorders, musculoskeletal connective tissue and bone disorders, general disorders, and administrative site conditions. Now, underneath those, they've got specifics. The point is all of those are possible. And it goes on, blood and lymphatic system disorders, thrombocytopenia, see the common things that overlap with all of these shots, neurological disorders, vasculitis. I mean, these are all because of these shots. How much you want to bet that that has all that and more, and they haven't even studied it? These are pretty much the same thing you'll find in most of these shots. So the question is yet again, is it benefit outweighs the risk with something that they're going to give you in Finland right now? If you work at a dairy farm, are going to tell you should, or your children, based on the idea that this is the safe thing to do. Is it? I hope we're asking these questions today. Now, getting into another point before we get into some more stuff around the Israel conversation, I wanted to highlight this. Steve pointed this out I think they both pointed out on AM Wake Up. And I really wanted to highlight this for a second because this is a story that got some attention, but there's so much going on right now. I have been on guard for the words are violence game for a long time. And we already see this. Domestic terrorism, the idea of Israel, anti-Semitism, it's all the same. It's the hate speech. It's all the same game. Try to act like you say these things. It's actual violence. So they can put you in jail for saying the wrong thing. Well, now in France, it's action, but it's in the same vein of conversation. French authorities investigate 3 men accused of what they're calling psychological violence. That is Orwellian as hell. Now, apparently what they did is they put out a bunch of coffins or a few coffins in front of the Eiffel Tower, sort of to make a political statement. It says they allegedly placed coffins inscribed with French soldiers of Ukraine. Now, why is that not considered a protest? It is, or an artistic display. I mean, how many things have we seen that are, in fact, many times grotesque? Marian Abramovich and these ridiculous blood-soaked they'll tear. It's art, guys. It's art. So you're telling me they can't come out and put coffins and make a political statement because you guys don't like what they're saying? That's the point. This is a free speech issue. They're shutting them down and arresting them and charging them with psychological violence for doing it because they highlighted the unpopular thing about the Ukraine war. That's what it's about. Had they done this about Russia, they would have let it go. How much you want to bet? And that's the problem. So they call it psychological violence. And of course, there was another term in here. I was highlighted. I lost it, but it says that's the main term. But either way, the point is about turning setting an object in front of this Eiffel Tower to be not. You could argue that by doing so they broke a law, which I disagree with. But that would be a minor crime. You put a coffin there. The fact that they call it psychological violence, they're pointing to the immaterial. They're saying that action caused me to be upset, which is violence in its own right. You see how alarming that is? You see how slippery that slope is with suddenly, now I'm traumatized by that. I have actual side effects. So your violence, that becomes like this is justification. Now, I don't mean justifiably, but this is their justification to put these people in jail, hold them accountable for what they claim were psychologically violent. It terrifies me that this is happening, and we need to stand up and point this out. This cannot be allowed because this is one step away from saying what Israel just did yesterday was psychologically violent. It's dangerous, guys. Pay attention to this stuff. Now, on a couple of other points around this one segment, there's a lot of this very slippery, very alarming stuff happening, which is not new by any stretch of the imagination, but it's happening in more conspicuous ways. Matt Orfala points this out, actually highlighting what Sam Santala said. He goes, so am I reading this right? Adobe, Photoshop, which I don't know why anybody uses them anymore. I can't use Photoshop unless I'm okay with you having full access to anything I create with it, including NDA work. Guess what? Just like with Stripe and everything else. Oh, I forgot I was going to make a point about that today. Updated terms of use. Saying we clarify that basically they have access to anything you do. You could read it all for yourself. Matt Orfala says you have to agree to let Adobe, quote, and this is from it, listen to your content. So this isn't just about Photoshop. It's an auto and video apps as well. Super creepy. It will be abused and probably on behalf of your government. 100% agree. And he even called this back in February, saying prediction, the government's going to work with Adobe Premiere to spy on dissident creatives. Whoa, guess what? He was right. I mean, crazy. What in the world? This is about everything all the time. The problem is, guys, is that your government, most of the governments in the world, specifically the U.S. government right now for Americans, is desperately aware that they're losing power. They're desperately aware that people are increasingly, look at the people being accused of genocide right now. Blinken, Biden, at this point, it's one action, one step away from them possibly being held accountable. which would then cascade to a lot of other problematic things. That terrifies these people that are typically used to being omnipotent. So it's becoming transparent. Everything you do, suppression, digital IDs, access points, shutting you down, spying on Adobe Creator. I mean, that's pretty alarming. Now, I'll talk about it more I want to say it in the opening of a show, but I want to just highlight that for those of you still supporting TLAV through Stripe and Give, Send, Go and the rest of it, at the moment, I'm pretty certain that they're going to kick me off possibly in the next week or so, in the next month. But I feel like I might have a workaround. I'm trying to play with. So right at the moment, if you're supporting us through those platforms, my advice is to leave it for now. And if it comes to a point to where I see it revoked, I'll make sure everybody knows to yank out your subscriptions. Because I don't know whether they'll just keep taking the money, not give it to me. I don't know. But just heads up, I'll let you know every step of the way, let you know where I think it should be now. And the sad part is, even those that support this, I get it. It's frustrating. And it just becomes like you just don't want to do it anymore, which is exactly what they want. So I hope that you'll stick with us, even as they make you jump from hoop to try to continue to support us. But that's going to continue right there. Now, one other small point that I just wanted to highlight somewhere. This is really ridiculous. And the Twitter is over the top right now when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I was in Robert's article, which I'll show you in a minute, we're already at about 2 hours. I was highlighting a point about how, as we've talked about before, Orthodox Jews in Israel get beat up by the IDF all the time, showing you that it's not really about Judaism. And I wanted to use this tweet that she has to put it in the article. So the first thing I noticed is I go here to do embed post, and it goes, oh, there's nothing there. And by the way, this is the same way I did this day before yesterday or yesterday. Still the same way now, half expecting it to be there today, like usual, when I go live. But nope, nothing, not there. Okay, maybe it's a glitch, right? So I tried to refresh it. I tried different browsers. Same thing. No matter what I did, just doesn't show up, right? It's a pretty inconvenient video for the Zionists, showing them beating up Orthodox Jews in the street. It's pretty bad. Look at that. He's pausing on me. I'm not even hitting that. Look at that. You see that? I'm telling you guys, there's something going on. I'm not hitting pause. Okay. I mean, it just couldn't be more obvious, guys. I mean, I'm not saying it's all, I don't know. But I'm telling you, there's something fishy going on. And now my other point, and I'll have to do this really quickly. We pull this back for a second. I'm going to bring up a private window. Show you this. So now if I take that tweet and put it in a private window, I think this is the most compelling. You know, now after already seeing all the glitches and what just happening, we put it in a private window. Doesn't exist. What? Doesn't exist? Well, I just looked at it, so I'm pretty sure. Let's try it again just to make sure. Gone. I mean, guys, that's not an accident. And by the way, if that was a glitch, I doubt it would just continue to be a glitch after. I mean, something is going on. Now, Khaleesi doesn't have her DMs opened up, so if you want to show her that, let her know. In any case, I think it's very clear what's going on. These things are not, I mean, look at the reach on that. And everyone is seeing this lately. I've seen the same thing. I've got posts that I put out about, like, the article I'll talk about in a second about Bill Maher was outstanding. It was excellent. There's a lot of important information, and even just stuff that you might think is just middle of the road for us. It still gets a hell of a lot more reach than what these things were getting. I don't think that's by accident, but I just wanted you to see that. And it's such a small example of some of the much more alarming, like, surreptitious actions we're seeing from Twitter right now. So before we get into some of these articles, I wanted to highlight some interesting points about the two-party paradigm. So Michael Tracy highlights something that Trump just said, continuing to show you that this is, I mean, Trump, it's alarming as hell to me that we're having all of the main presidential candidates, which is where they're going to channel everybody into, as always, lesser of evils and all that nonsense, are all like competing to be the most aggressive Zionist, which big surprise for those of paying attention, right? But he says, Trump says Israel needs to finish the job quickly. He says unnamed people are telling him October 7th never happened, just like Holocaust deniers, he says. He laments that the Israel lobby is not powerful enough. Don't forget, we just played that interview where he was arguing that Israel had control over the U.S. Congress and not anymore today. And it's a shame, he says. And he says it's because of Biden. There are his supporters that just continue to pretend like, la, 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 that's not true. It's a public interview he did for himself, and he says it very clearly that Israel should have control over the Congress. I mean, you could argue he misspoke, But it was followed up, and he goes in, Joe Biden's responsible for it. He clearly said it, guys. And this only makes that more clear. And he says Chuck Schumer's become like a Palestinian, just degrading and dehumanizing these people. Like that's an insult. Like it's disgusting. They're either that stupid or that compromised, guys. That's the problem here. But realize that the point about October 7th is anybody arguing it just didn't happen? I'm sure it exists out there. But all he's trying to do is highlight the most extreme, most unverified statement that it was like all a mirage. It was all, certainly possible. It was all TV screens and wag the dog. I guess anything's possible. But is that an honest argument that's being held in a legitimate way, in an influential position? No. The reality is there's a hell of a lot to show you that they allowed it to happen. But of course, by him saying that, it waters that down as well. There's a lot happening here. I'll make some points about after I play this clip.
So, number one, they have to finish the job. Israel has to finish that job. They have to finish it quickly, strongly, and they have to get back to life again because it's taking too long. They have to finish the job.
We're not.
Win and finish.
Gotta win. Gotta win. The attack on October 7th, and it's getting more and more demeaned. They're demeaning it. I have
to go in, win, and finish.
Gotta win. Gotta win.
Sorry.
The attack on October 7th, and it's getting more and more demeaned. They're demeaning it. I have people now telling me they don't think the attack ever happened. And take a look. You watch the news reports.
I have the
where
50
people
minutes
that are
of video.
protesting. Sure, I know you do, and so do I. But
oh, yes, he's got the snuff film. He's got the disgusting snuff film. It's been proven to be riddled with lies and misinformation by anybody honest. But Hannity, he's got it. He's got it.
Here's the thing. You watch these people on television, and then just like you have Holocaust deniers also. They say the Holocaust never took. It's the exact same people. They're saying it never happened. AOC +3.
Did she? We're going to stand by that, Trump? AOC is claiming it never happened? These people are just patent liars, guys. They're just coming out and saying what needs to be said for the agenda. Clearly, what they'll argue is that's not what he said. You know damn well that's what he was insinuating, and he clearly said that. And then AOC, it's just people who want that to be the point is the liars who defend the liar will lie for him, and that's not what he meant. Trump is an expert at saying things right down the middle. And that's not down the middle, but my point is he insinuates that and leaves it kind of open so you can deny. The point is that he's pretending a large part of the conversation, mostly people that call out Israel's crimes, are pretending October 7th never happened. Well, what you're doing is burying the Hannibal Directive, the fact that they knew a lot about it. It's pretty grotesque when you realize what they're doing while he gaslights for the story.
Israel was the most powerful lobby in the country 15 years ago.
Oh, don't you mean AIPAC, Trump? Not Israel as a foreign country? Oops.
Today, between TLAV and AOC and all of these people, what they're doing, Israel, they don't have the backing that they once had.
Okay, yeah, you got it. So Israel doesn't control Congress like it used to. Oh, what a shame.
You'll give it to them.
Yeah, I'm good. But they don't have the backing. Even Israel, they don't have the backing that they once had.
You'll give it to them.
He says you'll give it to them. Okay, so if we're understanding the breakdown of what's actually being said, Hannity pushes him to give them back that power. Do Republicans agree with that? This is crazy to me that this is being publicly discussed at a time when people are more aware of what they're actually doing. And I'm talking about AIPAC and lobbying on behalf of a foreign country. Even he just said Israel, not Israel. He didn't say on behalf of Israeli interests. He said Israel's lobby. That's not supposed to be legal, guys.
Yeah, I'm good. But they don't have the backing. Even Schumer has become like a Palestinian. Chuck Schumer. Jewish.
You know why? Because he dared to barely step out of line and say that's not going, they shouldn't be doing that. And then he fell right back in line. But that's the point, is they eat the people alive that step out of line barely. Meanwhile, there's plenty of Congress people out there that are, at least some of them anyway, that are saying, I don't necessarily believe they mean all of this, but saying the thing that we're seeing. And they go after them too, but realize how aggressively, more so than anything, that they go after the person because they're trying to send a message. Schumer is aggressively supporting Israel, and that's how they talk about him.
Always strong for Israel. He's become like a Palestinian.
He called for elections in the middle of a war.
Yeah, it's a very bad thing. It's a very sad thing, and how
dare we let them pick, choose their own representatives? He said it twice, by the way, like a Palestinian. Look, it doesn't matter what you get. The point is that the only way that makes sense to you, if you somehow decide that Palestinians are lesser than, which I'm sure plenty of you do, which is disgusting, and you should think about that.
Very dangerous thing. But if you look, so many people, I watch on your show where they're going and interviewing these people that are protesting just recently at Columbia and the different places. They say, we don't believe October 7th ever happened.
Nope. I've never heard that at any of these protests. In fact, most of them are highlighting the fact that it was an act of resistance. So is he just making that up? Probably. Ask yourself why and where's it coming from?
And they may believe that, you know, they may actually believe that, but they have to get the job done. They have to get in there and they have to get it done.
No, yeah. So just keep killing children. Get it done, Netanyahu. He's on your side. I mean, it's just unreal. The point is, I bet you he doesn't even know whether it's real or not. Somebody handed him some talking points. The people that give him, you know, lobbyists or influential people or people he thinks he's supposed to trust, that's Donald Trump for you. Right? Look at his last cabinet. How'd that work out? Got to have the insiders close to you, right? Oh, now every one of them are enemies of the Trump crowd because they were enemies to begin with. They're bad people, guys. He brought in the worst of the worst, like Bolton and Pompeo. And guess what? People like that and Nikki Haley are right back in line with him. They're about to become his next cabinet. Hope we can pay attention this time. Sadly, I think the two-party paradigm is just as influential right now. But this simply highlights, I don't even know of anyone saying October 7th never happened. I mean, I actually agree. I mean, I'm sure it exists somewhere. QAnon, something like that. But my point is that I don't see anybody actually saying that. And pointing at all the, well, actually, they do include the cradle and so on. My point was going to say, I thought it was all corporate media stuff, but I actually think most people understand that there was, I mean, actions took place. It was about lying about what happened, hiding that you were aware of it, or allowing it in some way. He says, I've heard many, including Israeli media, saying that there was a deliberate security lapse, even Israeli media. But by highlighting it, what he says, the way Trump does, is seemingly trying to bury all of that. He goes, I know many believe Palestinians have the right to armed resistance per international law. What do you mean believe? It's so stupid. That's just the law, man. You don't have to believe it. It is the reality. It says, but I don't know what the AIPAC suckling imbecile is talking about here. But just in case you haven't seen it, here's a great breakdown from Truth in Media from Ben Swan that highlights 10 days before October 7th and again 3 days before, Egypt's intelligence officials repeatedly warned Israel about what was about to happen. And it goes back months before that even. Haaretz covered this. But let's let Trump pretend like it's all lunacy, focus on his conspiracy theories, right? I don't even mean that in the sense like the corporate media does. The point is everybody has theories about things that are going on, and Trump just wants you to look in the direction he's pointing. But guess why you shouldn't? Trump is desperate for Miriam Adelson's cash. Haaretz writes, her condition? West Bank annexation. Well, guess what? Trump doesn't care about that. He gave them the Golan Heights. He gave them Jerusalem, even though both of them are illegal and he wasn't allowed to do so. This is only going to happen because they need that money. Both sides of this, Biden and Trump, are aggressively backed by aggressive Zionists, people that are mindlessly in the interest of Israel. They openly tell you everything they do is in the interest of Israel's policy. And here they are equally supporting your two main candidates. I hope that makes you uncomfortable. If you have a brain, it should. Why that's okay for anybody should, I mean, it's incredible to me. If somehow you thinking they're both Chinese backing, if that makes you feel, that's how you should feel about anybody that's outside of this country, supporting, funding, driving into power two people that act for their interest. That should blow your mind. That's what this is. Now, Tracy also highlights Nikki Haley arriving in Israel, apparently on Adelson's jet. He goes, well, you look at that. Nikki Haley apparently flew to Israel for her big quasi-official visit on one of Adelson's private jets. What a surprise. Just as Miriam Adelson announced her $100+ million campaign spend on Trump. Now, I'm talking to Trump supporters that don't think that she's part. It's already happening as far as I can tell. These people are not on your side. Nikki Haley is a cartoonish version of an old neocon, and yet she's about to be in Trump's cabinet. Aaron Mate highlights what Biden said with the Time magazine interview. Asked by Time magazine if he thinks that, quote, Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation, Biden responds, quote, there is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. It's a pretty weak answer, but the truth is that's always been the case, and Haaretz has written about this for years, well before October 7th. He says, so why is Biden funding, arming, and enabling Netanyahu's prolonging of the war? It's probably just an accident. I mean, trying to make a middle of the road statement, but Biden saying that really does put himself in a bad position. Hopefully they go to jail for it. The point is that you're arming an entity that is, even by your own admission, doing so for nothing but his own benefit. So that's Biden's side of this. Another point, this is from Byron York. I mean, we should all laugh out loud about this. Biden, Harris, Donald Trump confirms plans to jail opponents. As they write, shouldn't there be even the tiniest bit of self-awareness here? Just a little. Now, look, guys, if you believe only one side is manipulating the game or lying about this or faking that, and you're the two-party, every single one of them are doing the same things. What's hilarious to me is they are shockingly lacking self-awareness. The idea that you could argue by saying this, they're just trying to kind of cover up the fact that they're politically going after Donald Trump in obvious ways, or that they're trying to put him in jail in obvious ways before which I don't think is actually about trying to stop him from running. I don't think that's what's happening, but either way, or they just put this out and don't realize how embarrassing that looks. I just think they're all this bad, but I think it's hilarious in its own right. He confirmed to do the thing we're trying to do first. Well, here's the White House in the same vein of just being wildly dishonest and lacking self-awareness and framing yourself as the thing that you're not. They say 80 years ago, American and allied forces stormed the shores of Normandy and bravely fought to defend us against tyranny and pure evil, and then absorbed all the parts that we didn't like. Is that how that works? We stopped them and we absorbed them all. Operation Paperclip, Dr. Ishii from Japan. Yeah, that's what they did, guys. Look it up. They brought in the worst parts of both sides to themselves. The government, not the country, but it definitely became a part of that. But that's them. We defended against them and we took it all. But it says today, we honor the service members who saved the world and sacrificed for our liberty and prosperity. Now, that's the 6th today. The point is, or was that it was 6. The point is, I always say this. The people that fought in most every case, I've argued, did so under the illusion they were fighting for freedom. So you should still be able to honor them for the sacrifice that they thought they were making. The reality is a lot different. Whether we're talking about World War II or anything else, that may be even challenging for some to think about. The point is, if you understand the true dynamics of World War II, it wasn't as simple as good versus evil. It just really was not. You can show that there were leading entities, both in the UK and the United States, that were actively funding and participating on both sides of the war. That goes to the government too. There's a lot more than we get, but that's a whole conversation we've talked about in depth before. The point is what Tiberius says, correction, 80 years ago, and now you could disagree even with this opening statement. American and allied forces stormed the shores of Normandy and bravely fought to defend. Well, I guess no, same point. You can argue they did that, and that they did so under the assumption they were doing the right thing, and maybe even in cases they did stop bad people. But my point would be that there's much more to the story than just this side fighting against evil. But he goes, today, and this is the point that matters, today we fund and support groups who commit the same atrocities while sanctioning the courts set up to the wake of this very evil. Now think about them saying this today while they know that they're supporting the Azov movement, they're supporting the living embodiment of everything we're fighting at this point in Israel's Zionist government, that they're actively sanctioning and attacking and threatening the families of people involved in the very courts, as he highlights, that were created based on this event. And you frame it as today we honor them because what else are you going to do? They're not going to give up. They're going to keep lying. But I think it's incredible to see. Now, let's talk about this important conversation. Now, I'm thinking based on, the time in general. This is important that I hope you guys will take the time to go through. But I'm trying to decide whether I wanted to read it like I was planning. Also have to go through it. The point is, there's a lot of important breakdowns in this that I think it goes to obviously the points Robert makes in this article, but just the bigger picture that damn near everything we're talking about is misrepresented in some way, lied about. In many cases, just the exact opposite of the reality. So first I'll play the clip, debunking Bill Mayer's dehumanizing caricature of Gaza. It was the clip that was circulating that went viral. It's not brand new. I think it was from over 7 months ago. So before, or I guess it would have been pretty much right in the beginning, right? So I think this was because of October 7th. Either way, here's what he's saying about Palestinians and Palestinian society.
Values and customs make a difference, okay? And the people of Gaza, by the way, if the Israelis did get rid of Hamas, they'd be doing a giant favor to the people of Gaza who hate Hamas too. But
next to a couple of Zionists.
Let's just go through the lists. Because the Israelis look like us in most ways, values-wise. Maybe we're not doing it the right way.
Isn't that sort of a racist statement in and of itself, right? I mean, it seems kind of weird to say it like that.
No. Religious tolerance. That doesn't exist in Gaza. You're either Muslim or an infidel, and you better be a Muslim.
That's a lie.
Female freedom. Free and fair elections. Free speech. Gay rights. Can I just finish my list? Pedophilia. I'll put that under don't ask. Child brides and so forth. Equality of the sexes. I'll categorize that under don't make me fucking laugh. The fact that, these people think that this is where they should be aligned with, that these are the values that you support.
Just that end point, actually, to start. Why is it that we have to pretend that to support or not support a genocide, that you're supposed to be completely in alignment with everything they think? You can objectively recognize that this is a murderous action, that what they're doing is destructive and illegitimate, while also saying, well, I don't agree with that policy, or I don't think they're doing that right. It's absurd for him to make this blanket statement that you're supposed to choose a side. That I look more like the Israelis, therefore I don't care they're committing genocide. Like, he can't actually believe that. I mean, I don't even understand how anybody who can speak, I mean, who has the intelligence enough to speak clearly, can end up saying something that is so completely devoid of objectivity. It's incredible to me. So here is what Robert wrote. So I'm just going to go through the actual breakdowns of each one of them. So, religious tolerance. He says that doesn't exist in Gaza, says Bill Maher, but who goes on to say you are either a Muslim or an infidel, and you better be a Muslim. Now, contrary to Bill Maher's ridiculous claims, there is a small but thriving Christian Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip, many of whom have now been unfortunately killed by Israeli airstrikes or driven out of the territory during the ongoing war. But it's a verifiable reality. There are churches, there are Christian communities, and they are completely welcomed in this discussion. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not some people there that don't like them, or just, I mean, anything. There are people in this country that don't like Christians or don't like Muslims. It's everywhere you go. But the point is, it is an existing, it's a part of their society. Does he not know that? Does he not care to look? Doesn't that seem ridiculous? Palestinian Christians have always had an essential part of Palestinian society. And while the majority of them that still live there are located in the West Bank, there's always been a Christian community in Gaza. Over 1,000 Christians lived in Gaza before Israel's attack on October, and that is even small because of what they've done leading up to that. But 70% were Greek Orthodox, and the remaining population were Roman Catholics. The Christians in Gaza were always known to be wealthy and well-educated. On a personal note, he says his mother-in-law told him that growing up in Gaza, every single one of her teachers at the local UN school she attended in her refugee camp were Christians. Doesn't seem to make sense if they're allowing them to teach their children that they somehow despise all infidels. It's just this ignorant, racist, bigoted mindset that they continue to push. Not to say that there's not some element of that. You can find it anywhere. It says, it is a well-known fact that as a financially prosperous community, the Christians of Gaza have a better chance than Muslim Palestinians to leave Gaza, as the costs of fleeing is extremely high, starting with bribing Egyptian border guards. Let's realize Egypt is not completely clean of all of this. That demand between $5,000 to $8,000 to leave for a single person, which is one of the reasons why it's obvious that they don't just get to come and go as they please. But it says there's also historic churches in Gaza, 2 of which the Israelis bombed and destroyed during the ongoing war. In December, Israeli soldiers even shot dead an elderly Palestinian Christian woman and her daughter while they were seeking refuge in Gaza City's Holy Family Church. On the other hand, Hamas not only publicly supports the full rights of Palestinian Christians per its 2017 charter, it actively congratulates the Palestinian Christians on their holidays while making sure to frequently mention the rights of Christians in their press briefings. Now, could it all be lies to fabricate some illusion? Of course. Their actions show otherwise. The head of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, has even performed various public visits to churches in Gaza, while Hamas condemns frequent Israeli attacks on Christian holy sites. It's just incredible. Like, of course, anything that could all be a manufactured illusion. But what do we see? We see them saying this, doing that, and then we see Israel bombing churches, killing Christians all over the world, in fact, Syria in particular. And then we just pretend like what they say is true while we can prove the opposite. Israeli propagandists will often point to there being no Jews living in Gaza, as proof that Hamas is somehow not tolerant of Judaism, to which Hamas has responded by affirming that its problem was with Zionism and not the Jewish faith. Which, yes, the older document, the earlier charter, which, by the way, was created at a time when there was much more overlap with Israel funding and controlling, I think, what was happening. In any case, the 2017 charter makes it explicitly clear. Hamas affirms that its conflict is with the Zionist project and not the Jews because of their religion. It's exactly what it says. The link is right there. Where was it? Right here. It's saying, however, it would be rather foolish to take the word of Hamas as proof, which I agree with, yet the accounts of the various anti-Zionist Jews who have traveled to Gaza and been treated well by the authorities does support the claim. Yet, this is not enough alone to close the argument. And again, there's always an overlap. It says, it is important to note that Israel makes it illegal for its own Jewish citizens to enter Gaza or any other Palestinian-controlled territory, which is one of the reasons why they pulled them out in the first place. So this argument that you claim that they all got pushed out is simply not true. And you can prove it with their own documents like most everything we're talking about. And here's another important point that's going to overlap with something in a second. While the issue of Christian Palestinians in Gaza could be dedicated to the entire book, Bill Maher's argument about Muslims and infidels is not only false, it seeks to play on stereotypes created about Muslims and Islamic cultures in general, in order to make it seem as if Palestinians in Gaza will kill you for not being on their faith. Something that, in fact, has happened in Israel more than once, a lie that Israel and its representatives are all too happy to lean into. Remember this woman? She's going to come up in a second, but here she is getting caught lying about this to make you think that they didn't have Christians in Gaza. Same lie they're pushing now, and Bill Maher is happy to lie about.
If a ceasefire means the return of the hostages and the dismantlement of a genocidal regime that has stated that they're going to attack us again, then
no, that's not the case. You have individuals protected in Qatar who have said that. I don't believe that's the reality. I'm not saying they won't fight for their resistance, but the idea that they're just going to keep attacking Jews until the Jews are gone, which is what they're talking about, is simply not the reality.
Everybody would be in favor of a ceasefire. But if a ceasefire means that we're just going to keep them quiet for a bit until they attack again, then it's Israel's obligation to defend its citizens and destroy that threat, don't you think?
Why is it necessary, it is reported, to start shooting, having snipers outside a church?
I saw the reports this morning. The church, there are no churches in Gaza, so I'm not quite sure where the report is.
So right there, she's used to, as all Zionist Israelis are in the past, of just saying a lie and having the media cow to that lie. Not anymore.
There's a Catholic church in there, isn't there? That is.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are no Christians because they would.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, there was a church, but no Christians, though, which is also a lie. He also catches her on. But I love how quickly you go from there's no churches. Oh, but there is. But yeah, there's no Christians. Are they really this ridiculous? I think so.
Driven out by.
Well, respectfully, there are Christians because I spoke to an MP yesterday who has family members in the church who are Christians.
Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know who was attacked.
Oh, well, let's just move on then, because I'm a liar. That's how every one of them have been shown. All of these representatives across the board have been caught repeatedly lying, as ridiculous as that. They're embarrassing. Now, female freedom. On the topic of female freedom, the Western regimes love to employ what is often termed colonial feminism in order to argue their superiority over other nations. While there are a mountain of different issues surrounding women's rights elsewhere in the world, and Gaza is in no way an exception to this, the idea that Hamas is implementing some uniquely evil system is just ridiculous. At this stage of Bill Maher's list, he doesn't elaborate on the points. He simply states them as fact. This is likely because he's already used his whole Muslim and the infidel talking point, conjuring up false images of Gaza being a society of bin Laden lovers. Maher didn't tell us why he thinks women in Gaza don't have freedom, but we can safely assume that he doesn't see a near 19-year-long siege and genocide as factoring into this. The most common talking point normally surrounds women's clothing, on which the Western world likes to point to laws implementing hijab or Islamic headscarf for women. In Gaza, guess what? There is no such hijab law. That's Iran that they point to. Although the society is societally conservative, and there's often great pressure for women to cover their hair, yet the way women are judged for how they dress and behave changes depending on where you are in Gaza. Some areas are much more socially conservative than other areas, but that law does not exist in Gaza. But here's an interesting overlap that you might not know. As they're screaming about the women and the unequal rights because the hijab and everything, this is what's going on in Israel. If we look at the Israelis, the more liberal Israeli Jews who live in areas like the city of Tel Aviv will dress openly, whereas, guess what? The more socially conservative Jewish communities will not allow their women to show their hair at all. For instance, even to their own male family members. That's not a joke. Well, that'll get denied like the woman lies about everything, but guess what? This is real. Married Jewish women are expected to cover their hair when in the presence of men or around their husband or other close family members. Such coverings is common practice nowadays for Orthodox Jewish women. Okay, so why is it not the exact same thing? Because it is. Just because you just don't like their society, you're talking about a religious reason to cover your hair. How is that different? And the point here is we're comparing Gaza, not Iran, to Israel. So here we have Israel forcing their women to cover their hair in certain circumstances, not across the board, but just the same way in Gaza. You don't even have that. You have some of them that societally feel that's the right thing to do. There's not a law in place. My point is, if you compare the two, it's much more strict in Israel, between Gaza and Israel. But I mean, it's just hilarious, the kind of things they put forward. Now, of course, the argument is just that it's ridiculous to argue that they're the same thing because we know there are a bunch of Muslim heathens. That's the mindset of the people that make these arguments. Just because they're Palestinians like Trump, you're acting like a Palestinian. Therefore, we know that. Well, all you're doing is tapping into the narrative spun by people like Bill Maher who don't know what they're talking about or are lying about this. It says, where was the other part? Oh, yeah. This just says, with this being said, even if Gaza had a hijab law like Iran or Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, is a chief ally of the United States, and Israel's trying to align with them, but we don't care about their hijab law, right? This is not a justification for bombing civilian areas indiscriminately. You do not bring about female freedom by mass murdering over 10,000 women. That should kind of be self-evident. Excuse me. Now, free and fair elections. This point is perhaps the most ironic, as both Israel and the United States are the reason why there are no elections in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem at all. When Hamas won in what Jimmy Carter, which I still question, by the way, literally called a free and fair election in 2006, Washington, Brussels, and Tel Aviv all imposed sanctions on the Hamas government. So there's only two ways to look at that. They pretended they liked the freedom concept and democracy and then gave them that option. And then go, well, we don't like what you chose, so sanctions, which makes them look like ridiculous children. Either you support democracy or you don't. You don't get to go, we don't like what you chose. Or based on the fact that we know Israel funded Hamas for the very purpose of making sure they didn't get a two-state solution, I argue that it's just as likely that they manufactured that outcome in order to use it the way that we know that they did. To say, well, see, they support bad guys. We can't allow that.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
And then the former head of Shin Bet goes on to tell you that they sent $1.4 billion in suitcases, for freedom. But the point is, the U.S., with the help of Israel, even plotted a coup against the democratic elected Hamas government in Gaza in 2007, supplying the Palestinian Authority with weapons and financing to depose Hamas. But it's okay. It was for freedom, right, guys? Right. We get democracy, but we don't like your democracy. So we're going to cheat and maneuver, regime change you into the right democracy. Like it's just laughable. It's just like we just played the clip from, I forget who it was now. It's just nothing but regime change after regime change and illegal action. That's what they are. I think it was, I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head. In any case, it says Hamas caught wind of the coup plot and foiled it, to which Israel responded by tightening its blockade on the Gaza Strip, which, by the way, has been the same ever since. So that's the game of saying that, we blockaded it, but we're not occupying it, even though we control everything. It's been a lie from day one. The last major attempt for Hamas and their Fatah rivals who run the West Bank PA to form a unity government was dismantled after Israel launched a war against Gaza in 2014, which scholar Norman Finkelstein argued was due to the threat of a Palestinian peace offensive. I love the frame. This is another thing to think about. See, in the United States, we don't see it the same way, but in the concept here is that if in the case here, or like Israel, for example, if you don't get enough of the majority or enough votes, you can form a unity government with the other coalition, or rather the other group, and form a I think that's the right term, form a coalition, I believe. Either way, whether I'm using the right term or not, the point is you could form with the other group and then become enough to become the government, right? So there was your opportunity. If you really wanted them, okay, the Hamas and PA were like, look, let's form and we can make our own government. And they said, no, war. And they invaded based on some other games they were playing. That's the same point. They funded them to keep them separate. And then they carried out a war in order to maintain that separation. I mean, it's been like this from the very beginning. And anybody who has honesty at all and the wherewithal to look for all, it's becoming more and more obvious. This is one of the reasons why you can't put this genie back in the bottle. This stuff has come out now. Even corporate media is beginning to point to some of this stuff. Now, it says Hamas has never stopped calling for free and fair elections, which is very true. You could argue they're lying, but that's very true. Anyone who listens to what the movement's leaders have to say will know this well. Now, by the way, the leaders don't necessarily mean the three of them safely in Qatar, but there are other leaders within this movement that have been speaking out, but even them as well, I think, is one of the cases. It says the one who's threatened by Palestinian national elections is Israel, not Hamas, who would likely win another election. So it's very clear that who actually fears the real election. Meanwhile, on the Israeli side of politics, there are literally hundreds of thousands of Palestinians living in East Jerusalem, which Israel has annexed and declared part of its territory officially, because of Donald Trump and the illegal actions where they're in. The Palestinians of East Jerusalem are neither Palestinian Authority passport holders, nor are they allowed to hold Israeli passports. They are given some random Jerusalem ID that the Israelis can revoke at any time they choose, and are not allowed to participate in elections. But democracy, freedom, right? That's free and fair elections for you in Israel versus Gaza. Free speech. Overall, obvious points here. People are not shy about publicly criticizing Hamas. Now, again, people will clutch their pearls. How that's not true, because you listen to what the U.S. narrative sellers tell you. The point is easily verifiable in 1,000 different ways. They will literally scream insults at Hamas members from inside their homes in some instances. He says, while there is no law preventing Palestinians from criticizing the Hamas government, there have been cases where police forces loyal to Hamas have detained and abused citizens for acting against them, not criticizing, something that cannot be denied. But by the way, you can show in the United States and Israel, damn where anywhere. But it says, however, it's not out of the norm for police to harass and even harm dissidents in the Western world. As many citizens of the Western nations who are critical of their governments know very well, right to this day, the case that can be made against Hamas when it comes to free speech can be made anywhere against just about any government. If you contrast it with Israel, however, the Israeli regime may allow Jewish Israeli citizens to get the right to free speech on most occasions. Most. Just ask the Orthodox Jews how that works out for them. With most of the exceptions to this rule coming during the current war, which now his point there is you now see Zionist Jews being attacked in the streets or shut down for the protests because they suddenly want them to stop or take the deal from Hamas, or just decide to not want them to keep killing Palestinians. That's the point. It's all about the narrative line and the people on the right. It's not just free speech in general, because you get free speech if you say the right things. Sort of happen that way in this country too. Now it says, yet for non-Jewish Israelis, there is clearly no such thing as free speech. Here, he said, I would refer to the following reports by Human Rights Watch. All these are linked. Amnesty International, B'Tselem, Israel's leading human rights group. Israel has openly defined itself, as per the 2018 nation state law, to be a state in which only Jewish people have the rights to self-determination. As Avi Shalom highlights, unique, which means, what's the word he used? Meaning that it only applies to one, right? It's not for everybody else. It's unique. It's specific. And we see that now more than ever, as Palestinian citizens of Israel are being arrested for liking social media posts and sharing content online. Compare those two things. It's just because the narrative is spun about what you're supposed to see them as from the loomer types of the world, which is based on irrational, bigoted nonsense in most cases. When you compare the two, it's really clear right now who is the most fascistic, who is the most authoritarian. And it's not even to say I've made it very clear. I don't support Hamas, most importantly, because I believe that they still have influence from Israel. But gay rights. On this issue, gay rights do exist as a category in Gaza under Hamas rule. They do. It is viewed by both the Hamas government and most of the socially conservative population of Gaza, whether Christian or Muslim, as a sin according to religion. Yet, the argument often made by Zionists that if you are gay, you will be thrown from a roof is completely inaccurate and cheap propaganda. There are gay Palestinians in Gaza that are open to their friends and members of their families about it, but this is only in the more liberal areas of the Gaza Strip. And there's places in this country that are like that. In a socially conservative society, like all religious societies on earth, being openly gay is difficult, but not to the point where you're going to be thrown off a roof. Now, it says, that being said, the Israeli attempts to pinkwash their war crimes in Gaza while pretending to be so liberal and open to gay rights themselves is not rooted in fact. Gay marriage is illegal in Israel. In case you didn't hear that, gay marriage is illegal in Israel. And while they may advertise their large gay pride parades in Tel Aviv as evidence of their pro-LGBTQ stances, this is actually not tolerated at all by large segments of the Israeli society. Quite the difference, isn't it? In fact, the second largest Israeli party in Netanyahu's ruling coalition, the Religious Zionism Party, is led by a man who openly brags about being homophobic. I mean, these things should matter, shouldn't they? Now, again, that's not to say that there's not extreme elements of in Gaza or elsewhere that might act in their own way, but from a societal perspective, it's just not the same thing. Now, pedophilia is a very interesting one. He goes again on this point. Bill Maher tries to play on the ignorance of his audience, following this point by saying child brides and so forth. So right off the bat here, the legal age for marriage to be consummated in the Palestinian territories is 18 years old. In the West Bank, while in Gaza, it's 17 for girls and 18 for boys. That's higher than the UK, guys. Although there have been cases of girls being married off at younger ages, this is not common and is not legally binding. In Israel, the age for marriage is also 18, despite there also being rare cases of child marriages there too. However, on the question of actual pedophilia, this is something that's shockingly easy to look up. Israel has also been declared a haven for Jewish pedophiles, who will often escape pedophilia charges in their countries by fleeing to Israel. Unlike Gaza, there have been countless cases of horrifying pedophilia gang rapes in Israel and all sorts of other atrocities of this kind, which are so out of control that nearly half of the sexual abuse cases between 2019 and 2020 involved underage girls in Israel. The reason Bill Maher mentioned child brides is just so he can invoke the stereotypical Muslim terrorist archetype in his audience's minds. It is not only that he is lying here, he is trying to stir up bigotry in order to justify Israeli actions in Gaza. Now, if you really haven't looked into this, you really should. It's actually pretty unnerving. Here's just a Cradle article. I'll include that as well. That goes over this horrifying. He wrote this as well for the Cradle. Robert, that is. Now, lastly, that Israelis like us. Bill Maher listed off all the points addressed above. He prefaced what he said by talking about values and customs, mentioning that Israelis look like us. He's basically trying to say that the Israelis are like us. They are Western people who share Western American liberal values, whereas the Palestinians are society is alien and immoral. As demonstrated briefly above, the Israelis are not a perfect representation of American liberal values at all. They are an ethno-state that is built on an idea of Jewish supremacy and does not afford equal rights at all. Bill Maher is simply lying to justify Israel's actions in Gaza. He does this by dehumanizing Palestinians, as is the case in all genocides and wars of aggression. You can't do it to equal human beings. So you have to transform the other into the equivalent of unhinged barbaric animals. How to do that? You lie. Very well put, guys. And I think this is an outstanding article that, of course, is getting very, very little reach. So share it, get it out there. Now, this I'm probably going to go over just in interest of time. I wanted to make sure we get some other topics as well. This is a great article. I mean, I actually didn't highlight that much, but so this is an important point. I know I do that all the time. This is important just in general because we've been highlighting this in particular, long before October 7th even, but especially afterward, Robert's work and myself, highlighting the potential for this to spin out of control, the understanding that if you understand the real dynamic, that Israel's well aware that they cannot take on Lebanon, Hezbollah in particular, that even with the U.S. support, that would draw in all the other parties. And it's very clear if you take an objective look at this, that they will not succeed here, which makes you wonder why they're continuing to push this. But Israel, the title of the article is, what does Israel seek to gain from a war on Lebanon? Now, the point right now is this is spun out recently, and it comes down to don't forget the first part of this, that Israel is occupying parts of Lebanon, according to international law. So what it means is that they have a legal right to armed resistance per the Geneva Convention. That's international law. So if they're bombing civilians, that's a crime, right? But if they are simply attacking, that's legal. Military targets, which again, when you're talking about illegal settlements, especially when those illegal settlers have been given official capacity by Israel, which has very publicly happened since October 7th, that there you've created a human shield dynamic there. These are the entities that you are using as your official entity. That makes them legal targets. And it's not even to say, not at least of which because they have weapons. But my point is that they have been attacking and occupying and doing all sorts of stuff, the settlers, but also Israel. And so Lebanon responded. And I think it has to do with multiple things leading up to this. As he writes, in the first instance, some 96 fires were caused. That's what one of these images are. It's this huge background. Since Monday, and this was published on the 6th, it was today, due to Hezbollah rocket fire, producing videos and images causing outrage over the extent of the damage caused, which doubled the amount of fire damage recorded during the 2006 Lebanon-Israel war, just in these first so many actions. Despite this being undoubtedly true, and Hezbollah has most certainly picked up the pace in its attacks in recent weeks, the corporate media is not providing context. Surprise, surprise. According to a recent report issued by Human Rights Watch, they've confirmed that Israel has, as I just showed you, by the way, again, used white phosphorus munitions against at least 17 Lebanese municipalities. These are crimes, no matter how you spin this, including the use of banned or airburst white phosphorus on 5 civilian-populated municipalities just since October. And just really quickly, which I'll just bring up the oldest one, which is just really crazy to me how obvious this stuff can be. I believe this one is from, oh no, this is the newer one. Come on, I can't type. So here's the older one. This is from 2009. Human Rights Watch. Israel's awful use of white phosphorus. Guess what happened? Absolutely nothing, because the United States gaslit the world and fought in support of the bad guys. Here's October 12th, 2023. White phosphorus used in Gaza, Lebanon. Right there. They've been doing this from the beginning. Use in populated areas, civilians. This is very real stuff. It's incredible that this is just allowed to continue. What it really needs to show you is that at least, maybe all of it, at least some of the controlling factions of our government are the bad guys here. They're allowing this to continue. Or at the very least, they're morally ambiguous. But the point is, despite being undoubtedly true, or at this part down here, that they've used this on civilians. So this is new, and just not new in the sense of the recent actions, but not new in general. But it says important to note that the recent drone attack came in response to deadly Israeli airstrikes that targeted Lebanese towns. So the point is they responded. So it's not even the fact that they're illegally occupied, which gives them the right to attack whether or not they're attacked. They were responding to ongoing attacks. And again, this goes back to the fact that they killed a Reuters journalist in Lebanon in October, I think it was 12th or 13th. I think I covered this on the day it happened. So also the fighting between Lebanon and Israel did not just begin. And this just happened. It's been going on long before October. But the point is, in the beginning of even just this phase, October 8th, Hezbollah began launching attacks against Israeli military positions, legal, along the southern Lebanese border, primarily targeting surveillance and intelligence gathering equipment. The strategy of escalating tensions in response to Israel's aggression against Gaza and later Lebanon has created an 8-month-long tit-for-tat battle along the southern Lebanese border with occupied Palestine. During this time, Israel has murdered Lebanese journalists. That's one of the ones, well, technically this is a Reuters journalist, but they have also, I don't think he was Lebanese, but in any case, they've also killed Lebanese journalists. They have killed medical workers, women, children, elderly citizens. And we're just talking about Lebanon, guys, not Gaza. In addition to hundreds of Lebanese Hezbollah members. The total death toll in Lebanon is around 400 since October. That would be a huge deal if it wasn't, I mean, it is anyway, but if it wasn't for an ongoing 50,000 plus genocide. But even Hezbollah are not terrorists the way that they're framed. It's it's easy to prove if you care to look. It's not to say that you can agree with everything. I don't agree with everything the U.S. military does. That shouldn't be a hard thing to recognize. But the idea that they frame Hamas or Hezbollah or Ansarallah as just this blanket statement, it's ignorance, guys. Stop falling for it. It says it appears that Hezbollah are now seeking to draw the Israelis into a larger fight. After having dismantled a multi-billion-dollar intelligence and monitoring defense network located in northern Israeli settlements, as was demonstrated in Wednesday's deadly attack on the Israeli soldiers, which they're really downplaying, during which the air defense systems didn't detect their drones. The sirens didn't even go off, showing that they've lost the capability to stop most of the munitions from being fired from the Lebanese territory. So right now, the Israelis are bogged down militarily and have failed to achieve any of their military goals in Gaza, while they also maintain a massive military presence in the West Bank. It suffices to say that Hezbollah is in a favorable position and appears to be leading the Israeli military into a trap. Now, to end this segment, he highlights this Israeli Benjamin Netanyahu is now at a dead end in Gaza, which I think everybody can see. Right? Rafah, with everything that's happening, the red lines. I mean, they've kind of come to a point to where it's, I doubt they're going to stop, but even the U.S. has been going harder and harder on highlighting the ceasefire game. He says, and has to deal with mounting pressure from the U.S. government. Netanyahu's problem is that his population doesn't believe that they've won the war. They haven't. And most Israelis want Tel Aviv to reoccupy the entire area. That's what Ben Gvir is pushing. The Israeli Netanyahu also has to deal with a large number of individuals from different parties, like the Religious Zionism Party, Gvir, Smotrich, who are telling him that they'll collapse the coalition if they bow to U.S. pressure. Now, Netanyahu knows there is no route to victory here in Gaza, and he's now faced with a choice. Which side of the double-edged sword on which to impale himself, right? Or to start to. The point is, either way you look, you're getting screwed here. So the only possible way forward is through another distraction on another front, and that's Lebanon. Now, this is obviously theorizing, right? But he says, if Israel seeks to launch a limited war against Lebanon, they can have a brief exchange of fire with Hezbollah and then attempt to close the Lebanon front and act like that, shift the direction. But he says the strategy means taking a huge gamble, one that will certainly result in hundreds, if not thousands, of Israeli deaths. When Israel attacks Lebanon, Hezbollah will respond with unprecedented missile strikes against Israel, which, of course, I argue will spin out and they will say they were attacked. But the momentum is shifted in such a way that the world, I don't think, will let them just bull rush over this. I'd like to believe anyway. Under these circumstances, he writes, there will be a little focus on Gaza, at least when that's happening, which I kind of agree. If this spun out into some major hot conflict between the two, that would take the attention, especially from the Israeli public, who will be fixated on the destruction caused by Hezbollah. In such an environment, striking a deal with Hamas, which is interesting, will be less controversial, maybe easier for him to pull off. Sort of like, we got to get this out of the way so we can focus on the big war. That's an interesting thought. He says, assuming the strategy all goes to plan, the natural next step would be for Israel to launch a large-scale attack on the occupied West Bank. So, interesting to see how this is developing. I think either way, it's illegal, like all the rest of it, but it seems like there could be a strategy to using this buildup for something else. And the other point to make is, so whether it's the U.S. or Israel, I think they're very aware that this is wildly dangerous, that what they're doing is almost guaranteeing that this is going to spin out into something they can't stop. So it makes you wonder why it's happening. I mean, the only thing that makes sense to me is that the U.S. is so compromised that it's being driven into this by the extreme elements of Israel's government that don't care and are focused on prophecies. And that's what seems to be most logical, but I hope I'm wrong. Now, here's what you're seeing from the Israeli side of this. This is one of the cities that were attacked in northern Israel, right? Which legally so, because they were bombing and attacking, and these are illegally occupied areas, part of Lebanon. A blaze tonight following another Hezbollah terror attack on Israeli civilians. Oh, so it's a terror attack now, right? And as far as I could tell, these were not civilians that were killed. We're talking about settlers who are legally part of the official army now. But in any case, you can call it what you want. And he goes, where are the ceasefire now people? It's such a stupid statement. So is there, a ceasefire conversation even taking place here? They're just trying to conflate the conversation. The reason people are calling for a ceasefire over here is because you're murdering children with constantly, deliberately. And there is even a conversation of a ceasefire. So we're going to get a ceasefire. I just, what's astonishing is the ignorance of people that are trying to gaslight people about murdering other people in other countries. But Maya says, this is our reality. Pray for Israel. Right. Pray. This is your reality because you're illegally occupying areas. You're illegal settlers. You're continuing to take things that are not yours, and you are ignoring the genocide. Not to say that I want individuals to suffer, but we need to realize where the context lies here. Now, Efrat Bengeson, an Israeli Jew speaking out about what's going on there, says, if the people of Israel, do you get it already that we were sold out or not yet? How hot does it need to get for you to understand? Same picture. She says, and no, it's not just the current government. There is no left or right. There are no sane politicians. It was not a failure. Speaking back to the same point, Donald Trump, right? She was one of the earliest covering this conversation. She says they don't have your back. They don't fight for you. They serve higher interests. 100%. You can be talking about the U.S. government too, for all that matter. She says the people of Palestine have been sold out too, of course, a long time ago. No value for their lives. We're all pawns on someone else's chessboard. When will it stop? Israel or Israel? This is an Israeli Jew speaking out about this, guys. It's the reality. Your governments are trying to scream you back into place by using their partisan manipulators who are screaming at the top of their lungs about how it's only this, it's China, or it's not that, support Israel. That's what they're doing. Pay attention. Sarah Wilkinson in the other side of this conversation, right? So after this happens, guess what? Israel responds by murdering Palestinians, because I guess that's all they know how to do. Because of course, if they responded in a certain way in other countries, depending on what they want, Robert arguing that they might want to do that, but I argue it's in the case of an organized sort of action at the right time, because they don't honestly want the bigger response, I don't think. My point, though, is that instead of retaliating against Lebanon, which would cause a response, you just turn around and murder children in Palestine, because that's what they do. Israelis surround, attack, and set fire to Palestinian homes, land, and property just south of Nablus. Why? Because they don't know what else to do. They're angry and they stomp their feet and murder children, because that's what they do. And on top of that, well, they dropped more white phosphorus in South Lebanon. This was on the 3rd. And this is a verifiable reality, guys. That's what that is. But the point is, you can prove this in 1,000 different ways. Now, on time, let's see where we are. About 3 hours. I'm going to decide what we're going to get to later. I definitely going to talk about this. Let's just talk about this now, since this was in the title. The other things we're going to get into is more development on the ceasefire, a point about the bombing of the UNRWA school, more bombings in general, aid, and more lies from the Israeli government. But this is important. So this, again, as I said, reportedly, because this is from Israeli media, Channel 13, I think, right? Channel 13? Yeah. So Channel 13 is reporting. And let me know if you guys have seen any updates, because this is apparently the way they're reporting this is that soon we're going to see the major report, I guess. But again, this all could be Israeli propaganda too. It says a political blow. Israel was put on the blacklist of the UN. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres informed Israeli officials. Now the question would be, why would they want to publicize this? Maybe to get ahead of it. I don't know. Maybe it's a lie. That Jerusalem had been put on the blacklist of countries, quote, countries that kill children. This is the first time that the army of a democratic country has entered this list. And in Jerusalem, they fear immediate consequences for military aid from the world. Let me check this out real quick.
מפרסמות הערב שמזכ"ל האו"ם אנטוני במערכת הביטחון החליט למאה שחורה מדינות שפון שהתקיים החלטה, בתגובה הערב כרגע נראה.
I forgot to listen to this earlier, so it's all in Hebrew. But my point is that they're showing him speak, and they're talking about this. So I mean, it's feeling more and more like this is something that's happened, but let's take it with a grain of salt, because Israel kind of have to, right? We all know why.
Let me preface these remarks with I never, ever believe Israeli figures. I've been in the government too long to know that the Israelis are patent liars.
So who knows, right? But in any case, I think it's obvious that they're killing children, 15,000 and so on, at least in this one endeavor since October 7th. So clearly, it's not a hard thing to wrap your mind around. The question is whether the UN did this or not, or whether Israel's lying about this for some other propaganda purpose. But that's how ridiculous this has gotten today. Now, always, we should question everything, not just trust any source. But in most cases, it's reportable to be able to highlight that they're reporting from Israel that this is happening, and you're simply reporting that this is what they're arguing and what they're claiming. But even then, the point is that we, like historically, like our grandparents and so on, if the New York Times writes it, it's true. And that's never been the right way to do it. But at the very least, you can argue that it's more reportable when it comes from what's perceived to be a prominent platform. But, that's just not where we are anymore. We need to be in a position where we question everything in general, forever. But it says he was learned this evening, Thursday. So they're claiming today by 13 that they gave them the incoming information and the final signature would come this week. So I guess we'll find out within the next week. In Israel, they said that they had been informed about the matter and that preparations, are being made for the publication of the decision. The fear in Israel is that the decision, which in fact states that the IDF is an army that harms children, because it literally is, will lead to sanctions from countries in the world. And that very well may be the case. This could be the straw that breaks the camel's back, with direct consequences from armaments, weapons. So I'm going to leave it there just because the rest is all building on the idea that it's going to happen. But I find that to be important. Now, I wanted to highlight some other things in this segment. Chris Mahan points out this is a former MIT associate, Professor Jeffrey England, an ordained rabbi, who says Jews need to fully reject any lingering sense of Christian morality and embrace ethnically cleansing Gaza in accordance with Talmudic law. I mean, you could read this for yourself. This is actually pretty wild. May 28th, that came out. Live by the law or die on the cross. Is what it says in the subtitle. Israel must stop pretending it's a nation like any other. Yeah, totally not supremacist at all. And it's not about Judaism, guys. I mean, certainly you could argue that. I mean, even Beth Selim literally says that. But my point is, it's just about Israeli. But here's the leading Israeli human rights group in the world. A regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. It shouldn't be contentious to point out what the leading Israeli human rights group says about Israel, right? Shouldn't be. But apparently facts are just too much to bear today for some people. But here's what they'll just give you the images he highlights. It says, and above all, given that the land is nearly all that matters to this death-worshipping foe, that's he's talking about the other side, and totally not the same for them, because the land is not what they covet from Israel, right? Hardly. Instead of repeatedly withdrawing troops from the areas we have just taken over so we can deny having un-Christian territorial ambitions, do you believe for a second that they care at all about pretending they're Christian? I mean, come on. It says we should conquer, annex, and resettle parts of Gaza so that Jews and friendly Gentiles both can live there safely, despite the fact that the opposite's being said by Ben-Gvir. Only Jews. That's what he says. It is only our lingering ideological subjugation to the Western tradition that makes them seem scandalous. Oh, okay, so we just pretend to be good people, right? Because that's what you're saying, basically, that we don't care about breaking the law or killing innocent people because as long as they're just not on our side. Oh, that was, okay, I thought there was two of them there. Oh, yeah, here we go. He goes further. England suggests Israel is justified in killing children, well, because Hamas holds them as shields. And literally makes the argument of holding them up as a shield, like not just having them in a building. I'd love to see evidence of that. The concept of the innocent civilian basically isn't true. He's just writing out exactly what we all know they've been saying. He backs up his assertion by citing a passage from the Talmud stating, it is correct to kill even the righteous among your enemy. Literally what he's highlighting, guys. These people are lunatics. It's not, there's plenty of Jewish people in the world that don't believe all this. Just like you can argue that there's extreme passion in the Bible. The point is that this is a certain kind of person that leans into the idea because these sentences say certain things that you're allowed to kill that child. No, that just makes you a bad person, possibly a sociopath. Doesn't matter whether your religion says it's true or not. The point is that killing a child is wrong. I'm a Christian. I believe plenty of things that I've talked about many times on the show. Not to get into it here. The point is, if I read something in the Bible that said I could kill a child, I would go, then I wouldn't believe that anymore. And the point is that on the end of the day, you can clearly see that there are plenty of things that show you, and my personal opinion, to break that down quickly, is that these things, all these are written by people anyway. My relationship is with something different, but either way, here is what John Spencer says about this. And I'm going to play this clip for you. Hey, there she is again. Remember her who got caught lying about the churches and Christians and then just changed the subject? Let's play this clip first. Again, we're talking about killing children or civilians in general. This clip is a follow-up to the other one where Piers Morgan was grilling the guy about killing civilians. And I know he got a good response from this, so he just went harder at the same thing. But I honestly don't think he's honest. But here's what he did.
See the report.
Oh, that's not it. Oh, right here.
Problem with the Yehuda Olmert government? What was the problem with the Rabin government?
Well, they didn't kill nearly 40,000 Palestinians in 8 months.
First of all, please, Piers, we know that the numbers have gone up and down like yo-yos. Even the UN said last week that it wasn't already 35, how many do you think have been killed? That it was 20. All I can say to you is,
how many do you think have been killed?
We have,
And by the way, she talks about other points of this. The UN has not said the numbers changed. I've played you that many times. They just stick with the lies. They have a narrative lie and they stick with that lie. 40 beheaded babies, whatever it is. The UN was explicit. The numbers have not changed. We've simply added context. The full number is still the same. It is still 30, 40,000, still 15,000 children. We've highlighted that we can only identify this many of them, which really means that the other ones are so mutilated that they can't figure out who they are. That's the disgusting reality, and they're using that, showing you especially how evil they really are.
I would say potentially around 20,000 because that's what the UN
you have
said,
no idea.
22,000.
You have no idea.
Let's not start with this line of questioning.
Actually, I'm going to start with this line of questioning.
I don't think Churchill knew in the middle of the Second World War how many Germans he'd killed. And so this is a farcical question.
See, here's the main point of the way that they're trying to play this game. You could make a fair argument, as the guy quoting this tweet says, that everybody's lying. Nobody really knows what they're... Okay, fair enough. The point then is, why are they lying about killing Hamas members and pretending they don't know or won't tell you how many civilians? And all that really shows you is if they don't really know, then they're just killing whoever they come in front, which is actually what's happening. Now, by the way, Churchill is not a good example. That was a very bad person. And I know this is a sensitive topic for plenty of people in UK, like going after there's people that pretend John McCain was a hero, right? I mean, there's a lot of people like Madeline McCain or the rest of them. There's plenty of people that pass away and they lionize them. Churchill was a very, very, very racist person that was carrying out, he was exactly what you would picture a government person as. Killing people for the agendas of their government, just like our government does today. So the reality of pretending, he probably didn't know and didn't care is the point. But either way, what this highlights is that she's admitting they don't know, but then pretending they do when it works for their narrative.
I can tell you is
you just gave me a number, but you've no idea why you've got that number.
That's what the UN says. The UN says, according to the so-called...
Okay, so you just told us the UN is lying and we can't trust them, but now you're citing that number because you asked for a number. That's what UN says. You just can't play it so fast and loose in both ways all the time. In the same sentence. You can't tell us they're all lying and then use that number when you want to. Like, they've gotten away with this flimsy routine for decades. Wrap your mind around that.
Old Gaza Health Ministry. Let's take their number. Let's take the number, the mistaken, corrected number.
Nope, that's a lie.
Of the Gaza so-called health ministry, all terrorists underground, hiding like cowards. But let's...
Okay, so now we're pretending that all the people that were killed are all terrorists? That's what she just said. All the children, all the numbers. On top of that, realize that both the military and their intelligence have admitted they were reliable and accurate, and historically have always ended up being accurate, which is actually an important point to counterbalance with that maybe only one side is pretending they don't know. Because if historically the Gaza Health Ministry has always ended up being pretty accurate to the outcome, which is even what Israel's admitted, then maybe they aren't making that up, and maybe some people do know. Maybe the dishonest ones don't.
Say now they're saying 22,000. We know we've killed 14,000 terrorists.
No, you don't.
So she just said they know 22,000. That's not the truth. It's the same number. So she is playing the ignorance of people, pretending like they cut the number in half because that's what propagandists were saying. It's not true. They played on the manipulation of the added context and then says, but yeah, let's just take that number fine, 22,000. We know we've killed 14,000. But his point, no, you don't. You just admitted that you're making up both sides of this. But either way, if you think you've killed 14,000, how in the world have you not shown us a single example? Not one.
Now you tell me.
Don't.
Yes, we do.
No, you
yes,
don't.
we do. So you tell me.
No,
we know
I'm
how
sorry.
many
I'm not
brigades
having
we've
that.
gotten rid of.
I pressed
We
the Israeli.
know how many brigades.
Hang on.
We know how many brigades we've gotten rid of. We know how many brigades are left.
She says we know how many brigades we've gotten rid of. Okay, so you're able to know how many brigades you've killed, but you don't know exactly how many people. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And if you're able, to Pierre's point, to know exactly how many brigades, how exactly are you capable of knowing how many civilians? Because by basically deductive logic, it means that you don't really know which ones are civilians or not. And you have this very broad overlap on who is considered a Hamas member simply by being in a certain location. That's the truth. And they've admitted to this. 972 Magazine's broken it down in 14 different ways. She just can't say that because that would look bad.
Respond to you. I did
we
put
know
this.
How many brigades.
I put this to an Israeli government spokesman. I asked him, how many Hamas have you killed? And he gave me this figure. And I said, how many civilians have you killed? And he had no idea. I said, well, then how can you be so precise of how many terrorists you've killed? You can't. If you've got no idea how many civilians you've killed, why should I believe a word about the numbers of Hamas?
Because we know how many brigades they have, because we have that intelligence. We know how many brigades
So just to be clear,
just
to be clear, you know exactly how many terrorists you've killed, but you have no idea how many civilians.
Absolutely. We estimate that there's about 14,000 terrorists, which we've gotten rid of. We know how many are left. There's 4.
How exactly do you know how many are left? What she's doing is saying we estimate this number, we minus it from that, so we know how many are left. But you just said it was an estimate. Like, I've said this more than once, but I actually don't think these people are very smart. Like, it's just by watching their way their brain works. Like, it's just, that's stupid what you just did there.
Brigades, and that's why we're in Rafah.
And how many civilians have you killed?
The UN, again, Piers, in the middle of the Second World War, I don't think you could have
Wow,
pushed
you're
Churchill
doing it as
to
well.
ask him,
Sorry,
what am I
Fleur.
doing?
You're doing the same thing the government spokesman did.
Absolutely
You know
not.
exactly
It
how
is
many
a
terrorists you've killed, but you've
nonsensical- we
no
don't know
idea
exactly-
how many
we
civilians.
don't know
Look at the guy on the left just smirking the whole time because he's loving this.
exactly.
How
We don't know
convenient.
exactly. We don't know exactly.
How
You're really hanging
convenient
on. You're
that
really
Israel
clutching
knows
on.
exactly how many terrorists you've
Do you
killed,
believe
but
the
you've
UN
no
numbers?
idea
Do
how
you
many
believe the
innocent
UN
women and
numbers?
children.
And then she just keeps screaming, do you believe the UN numbers? What does that have to do with anything? Talking about what you said about what you've killed compared to what you won't answer for. The UN numbers don't even play a factor in that point. That's the best they can do. She is the best they can do. That's embarrassing.
Do you believe the UN numbers?
Huh?
Do you believe the UN
I
numbers?
just find it staggering that you'll all come
Do
on
you
and
be-
say to me,
I
we
find
know
it
we've killed
staggering that in the middle of the war-
14,126 Hamas, but we've
Because
no
we know-
idea how many civilians.
Because we know what the army that we're dealing with is.
Okay, here's the other point that he forgot to make this time, I guess. If you're telling us that you have been precise, that we've done more to avoid civilian casualties than ever before, but then now you're saying we just don't know because nobody counts during the war, reconcile those two things.
We know what the
No,
terrorists
I'm
army
sorry,
that
it's
we're dealing with
nonsense
is.
to say you can count one and not the other.
Absolutely not. It's
Absolute
nonsense to even ask the
nonsense.
question. I don't know who in the middle of a war starts counting here.
You're
starts counting the
counting.
people that they've killed.
You're counting.
No.
Okay, again, so we don't count is what she just admitted to. Oops. Okay, so then how can you pretend that you've not killed that many civilians? That's just basic logic here.
We know how many are left.
Sorry,
We
you're
know
counting,
how
but you're
many-
only counting one side.
Piers, you seem to be a little obsessed with this.
Yeah,
counting
I'm
of
obsessed with how
numbers.
many civilians are being
Let's say-
killed.
That's the best they can do. I mean, that's got to be pretty embarrassing. And that's why I think they've yanked out and put a new person in there. But this is John Spencer simply going, hey, Piers, if you want to know the answers to your questions about casualties and urban warfare, I'm more than happy to help you understand. The fact is that all the numbers are wrong, right? Which is a fair argument to make. But of course, if you read the whole thing, he very clearly slants this to one side. As a seeker of truth, it's important to ask and discuss how both sides, in this case, the IDF and the Gaza Health Ministry, come up with their numbers. You questioned Israel officials. I have not seen you question the official Gaza Health Ministry. No, are you serious? Like, where do these people live? Have you not seen them go scream about that? I mean, they have all done that. They've all, do you condemn Hamas? We know numbers aren't accurate. I mean, the point is that what they're doing is acting like you've only asked one side. What he's literally doing is asking about the people who are conducting the action. You're killing, you're bombing, the idea to pretend if you're going to ask Hamas, how many people that they've had killed? It's just a bad point. Overall, the bottom line is that it's simple logic. It's very clear to see. They either don't care about how many they're killing, or I guess more than either they don't care, it's indiscriminate, or they're completely targeting them and they don't want to tell you that. In any case, it shows you that they're lying to you. And all she's doing with this, I mean, yeah, some of these people are just rough, man. Now, I'm just talking about the way you can just see into their lack of a soul, in my opinion. That's my personal thought. There's something just exude that they put off that shows it. And I actually believe, because look, if people that can pretend like murdering children is somehow acceptable, there's something wrong there, guys. There's just no way around it. And so I feel like you can sense that and see into them when you see that. And this, again, it's very, very superficial. It's my personal opinion. But I feel like you can see it. You can see this kind of sociopathic daze in their face. Now here, Yunus Tarawi just highlights an individual example. He says, as you may know, I've interviewed a soldier who fought in the Khirbet Qaza in East Khan Yunis. The town, which was a home for 13,000, was 100% wiped out. And you can listen to these. He's got a whole bunch of them in a row. And he admits it. He says that town doesn't exist anymore. I'm happy about that. And, and openly talks about it like it's justified because they supported him. They took in and supported the Hamas members. So I'm happy their whole town is gone. Oh, every single one of them did that. Every single one of them had a vote to keep. I mean, come on. These people are this is sociopathic. if not psychopathic, to argue that you somehow can just wipe out an entire town and feel good about that. He asked him, anything happened from your military mistakes and not mistakes? Basically answering, yes, we killed them. Basically, if anyone that dies is the fault of Hamas. And that's the same thing you're hearing from all of them, from the U.S. politicians. Doesn't matter if we shoot a child in the face. That's Hamas's fault for starting the whole thing. That's what they're doing. I recommend you listen to the whole thing. Mondoweiss on the 4th highlights Netanyahu's rant against the ICC. Yet again, quoted a biblical verse that warns against the dangers of not completely wiping out your enemy's society. It doesn't take much to figure out what this means for Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. So Amalek, it's just one after another. I don't know how you think that's not. I mean, these people are showing you who they are. It's not just the society. Women, children, innocent, doesn't matter. Kill them all. That's what they're saying. Tiberius highlights what his Twitter feed looks like these days. Dead child, dead child. The U.S. tells the world it upholds international law. Dead child, dead child. Expert on international law explains how Israel's committing war crimes. Dead child, dead child. Biden says Israel's not committing crimes. Dead child, dead child. UN reports outlines how Israel's guilty of genocide. Dead child, dead child. Biden says Israel's not committing genocide. You see where it goes, right? Dead child, dead child. Donald Trump charged for lying about sex scandal. You just have to include that one, he says. The point is, it's just consist. I mean, it never stops. I've seen more horrific things in this one engaged topic than I've ever seen in my entire career. And Muhammad Shihada simply highlights what it looks like in Rafah now. I mean, really take a second to look at this, guys. That's Rafah. That's what it looks like now. That's gone. I mean, gone. And we're going to pretend that these were all Hamas locations or tunnels. No, that's lunacy. They've wiped this to the ground. And this was the safe zone. Just let that sink in. Now, I think what we're going to do, by the way, I'm going to do a show tomorrow. Sure. That's the plan. 100% planning to do that. I don't say that because, who knows what happens, but I'm doing a show tomorrow. And so I'm going to include all of this along with some other new stuff as well. But in general, as so you know, since I just, we briefly talked about it at the wrap, ceasefire in general, it's very clear that we're seeing Hamas basically highlight exactly what we already thought was happening. That apparently there's been two different, either the Israel's lying about what Biden did or Biden's playing some factor. The point is that they've just gotten words. They were saying stuff is happening and they're saying we are ready to accept it though. Hamas is claiming a disparity between what they're showing each other. And ultimately one thing Orwell highlighted to me is that if you read this, the actual breakdown of the ceasefire, temporary cessation of military operations. And if you read more into section 14, it simply seems to suggest it gives them an opening to go back to bombing should they decide to, in my opinion, which is exactly one of the obvious problems here. And I think that's what Israel's desperately about. And the reality is Israel's always planned to continue this, and they're just gaslighting the world. They bombed another UN school, killing many children. Apparently 14 of them were children that have been killed, another school. And all they can do is come out and say, as Elon Levy says here, no, no, we didn't start a UN school. It was a terrorist, Hamas terrorist. Oh, okay. I don't see the images or even source material. All I see is you just stating otherwise, even as BBC says they struck a school and killed children, right? Here's Elon Levy. Well, when I say UN officials are covering for Hamas, that's what I mean. That's it. That's all you get from him. Claims that Hamas are operating the schools, not shocking. This is normal. Okay, I mean, so text on Twitter is supposed to convince people as you've been caught lying 50,000 times? The point is, this is what they did to the school, guys. That's a dead child sitting there, dead people on the ground. But you just go, that's not true. Hamas and stuff. What does anybody think? Even if you were the most worthy person on the planet, you're just saying otherwise. And the point is that everybody across the board, from the United States to the UN to Canada to everybody who has any standing in this, even your allies have come out and said, you have provided no evidence. Report on UNRWA concludes Israel has not provided evidence. April and end of April, an independent review finds no evidence to claims of UNRWA and Hamas. I'll read this later. UNRWA claims fact versus fiction. Of course, condemnations mount over Israel's proposal to label them a terrorist agency. Like, it's just getting pushed back now because it's flimsy and they don't have as much influence as they did. A large number of this was just a image of the people suffering because they bombed that. Of course, we have many examples here. bombing in central Gaza Strip, just killing people. I mean, these are all civilians standing there watching this explosion. Pretty telling, guys. They're just bombing innocent people all over the place. 150 people killed in 24 hours, most of them women and children. All of these, on and on and on, guys. These are just the last couple of days. Dead people getting killed and all over. Not Hamas members, not even a justification for it. Just death everywhere. We'll talk about this in the next show. Israel apparently phasing out the desert detention center. Oh, you mean the torture camp? You're phasing it out? So you're admitting to it? Or, how's that work out? As Max Blumenthal writes, Israeli officers have sodomized Palestinian prisoners to death in this camp. Oh, we're going to phase it out, though. Sort of like the human shield dynamic. We'll call it something else. Does that work? That's what they're going to do. Israel is secretly targeting American lawmakers with Gaza war influence campaign. Surprise, surprise. We'll talk about this one. Oh, this I used for I'll show you this since we put it for the image. Actually, we'll end with this since I used that image. We'll also talk about UN aid and more lies there, but we'll end with this. Make sure I didn't anything here. Yeah, we'll end with this. So this is a clip, low-key shared, of I believe this is somebody being, interviewed for like becoming, I think it's Secretary of State or another position in the UK. And it's just shocking the way that they refuse to answer this question. And it's I don't even know explain it. You'll be able to immediately recognize why she is dancing around the point. And that's why this is even shown. Fake social media accounts, influence campaigns. Where was it? Right here. Secretly targeting American lawmakers, but it's not just American lawmakers, right? Reportedly using fake social media accounts to garner support. Here is Secretary of State, or, for the British Secretary of State for Media, Lucy Fraser, can't condemn Israel. Oh, I guess I did forget that. Let me grab that. As I grab this, it just goes on for a minute where she is just in really embarrassing fashion, just simply refusing to even address the question until she's sort of forced to. And it's she acts like we don't even know, even though it's the most verifiable thing. Here's the video.
You more shocked as a champion, I imagine, of independent journalism that Israel has locked journalists out of Gaza in order to hide what it's doing in Gaza. And I kind of searched. I can't find you on the record anywhere condemning Israel for locking journalists out of Gaza.
I made a number of speeches, John, and you're free to read them all, about how journalists are treated across the world.
Yeah, but in Gaza.
And including referring to the high number of deaths that have taken place in Israel and Gaza, and always happy to support journalists.
So just to get it on the record, you share my shock at the fact that Israel is locking journalists, including BBC journalists, out of Gaza.
I am very keen to go to Israel to understand.
No, that's. This is really a very simple question to answer. It's not a question of you having to be on the ground in Israel. You don't have to go to Israel to have a belief in the principle of independent journalism. You can't visit every country in the world to do an on-the-ground report as Secretary of State. This is a matter of principle. Does Israel have the right to lock journalists out of Gaza so that they're unable to report on the on-the-ground breaches of international law in Gaza? That's a question that you can answer in quite a straightforward fashion.
I like to look at evidence. And,
right.
And
you can't get any evidence.
If
journalists are locked out of Gaza, you can't look at the evidence by definition. That is the point of journalism, to gather evidence. You can't see the evidence because journalists are locked out of Gaza.
Very clear in my engagements with news operators and in a number of speeches that I've made about the importance of the freedom to report, the difficulty in reporting in war zones. And I'm very keen, John, very keen to ensure that wherever people are in the world, that they have the freedom to report.
God dang, it's just so frustrating. So my opinion, she is either aware that by saying bad things about Israel, that it's going to hurt her career. So she just tries to avoid it, which is certainly a large thing that happens, or she's being bribed, funded, influenced, compromised in order to be afraid to make these comments, or that it's financially in her interest to not. I mean, this is what's going on in the world today, guys. It's not even up for debate. It's only debatable whether it's happening in this case or not. Right? I mean, the whole thing is that the first point is almost more prolific, that people just recognize that. They know that if they say the wrong thing, they'll get attacked by the lobbying groups, so they just kind of avoid it. But it's infuriating, isn't it?
And I will always stand up.
You're constructing a variety of Secretary of State. You're
for
conducting
those who are unable to do that.
Yes.
So yeah, she is currently the Secretary of State.
You're constructing a variety of sentences to avoid saying something.
Because I would like to, if you're putting something to me,
yes,
it's my job to assess the evidence. That is not a matter on which I have assessed the evidence, but I would be very interested to do so.
So for example, you would have to go to Ukraine, would you, and the occupied areas of Ukraine, before you could express a view on Putin and whether it's right or wrong for him to look.
Is that the case? No, it's not. Seeing as how they've all expressed many opinions on how they should deal with Russia and how Russia is committing war crimes, or China is committing genocide against the Uyghur, like all these things, which in some cases may be true. You can decide for yourselves. The point is, they're happy to make those assessments without going there, because these people are ridiculous. It's like they think you're that dumb. They think we are that stupid that we can't piece together that they're just being inconsistent with their basic logic. I'm glad he's calling it out.
So you cannot express a view on any war zone unless you in person visit that war zone. You're going to be very busy over the next few years.
I absolutely haven't said that, and you are misconstruing what I said. I said I'm particularly interested in what's happening in Israel and Gaza in relation to journalists.
All are.
And that is why a number of months ago I asked the Foreign Office if I could go to Israel in order to go. And I also asked to go to Ukraine as well. Unfortunately, neither of those trips have transpired. But I asked again. I'd just like to finish. I asked again last week because I am very interested in the high number of deaths in the region and in relation to journalists.
Yes,
so I asked my department again, in fact, last week.
Yeah, hundreds of journalists, hundreds have been killed.
If it was possible for me to go, because I'm very interested in ensuring that journalists have the freedom to report.
Yes, well, they don't. And they don't. And the committee will note that you've been given more than 5 minutes to express a view on whether Israel should lock journalists out of Gaza, and you're choosing not to answer that question.
If that is the case, it is wrong, but I would like to look at the evidence. I think
what do you mean? Sorry, wait a second. If you'll allow me to pursue this, Permanent Secretary, if that is the case, are you saying that all these months into this war, and you don't know definitively whether journalists are locked out? It's not a question of if it's the case. You only have to talk to the BBC at one of your meetings with them, and the BBC Middle East editor will confirm with you that it is the case.
Right. I mean, they don't even need that. I mean, it's a public and obvious fact. The Israeli government has said they're locked them out. So for her to pretend like she's somehow devoid of the evidence, I'm not involved in the situation. Joe at the corner store is watching it right now on TV. Everybody in the world is aware that they have done that. They've talked about it. They just have a narrative around it. And to his point, they have a unique and access to the BBC or any journal. They can ask them. And they'll tell you, yeah, we can't get in. Again, same point. CNN, they've all told us that they're not able to get in. So this is her pretending like she's being objective and just actively ignoring the topic and acting like, I'll look into it, we'll find out. You damn well know what's going on. That is somebody who is ignoring it for personal reasons or is compromised. And that is everybody in these positions, guys.
The BBC are locked out. So it's not a question of if. Let me move on. I
I just wanted to say, for the record, I was at the same meeting with the Secretary of State with the BBC, and I recollect we covered a range of topics, including their digital investment, a whole load of things that they're doing.
We talked about a lot of stuff, so I forget. That's basically the point. Yeah, we talked about a lot of stuff, right? Well, that's why I included this image. Just, for sake of context. As it says, in Israel in a nutshell, the state, the policy, the people. A herd of settlers assaulted the Palestinian journalist Saf al-Kawasami in occupied Jerusalem. Look at this picture, guys. The other one's even worse. The other one, it might be right beneath it. Now, there's another one circulating that shows him when they're grabbing him. One guy's got his arm around his neck. But just look at these people. They're all kicking him, running at him, look at their faces. That's hatred. And enjoyment, quite frankly, just to punish this guy. And that's acceptable. That's press freedom in Israel. Go back to Robert's article. You already know that. Crazy. Now, just to finish, we talked about the reportedly using fake social media accounts to garner support. Well, here's an article or a thread from Squirrel. Israeli propaganda networks are using digital blackface by making fake accounts with stolen photos from Black people to spread their genocidal propaganda hoaxes across social media platforms. That's exactly what Forbes is writing. And you can look at it for yourself. The point is there's an racial overlap to this. And there's a point we'll get into tomorrow from Russia. You might have seen it, where Ukrainian militants, neo-Nazi elements, execute a bunch of Black soldiers because they tried to leave, saying you should have stayed in Africa, whatever they said. It's gone pretty viral. And guess who those people are? The same Azov movement, militant, extreme racist that Israel and the United States openly support. There's a reason that they're doing this. They're trying to manipulate people using faith. There's a reason for this, guys. Now we'll come back and we'll do more of this tomorrow. I'll leave it there for today. I just hope we're breaking through. I hope we are breaking through with these conversations and getting to people, whether it's the conversation about being cautious around the COVID bird flu direction, whether it's about medical freedom in general, any number of the topics, or the ongoing immediate genocide that we need to stop. I just think it's important to recognize who these people really are. It's not, as always, not every Jew, every Israeli, every Christian, every American. It's never that simple. The point is that they want you to think like that. They're trying to force you into that bigoted logic. So you just choose a side. It's just always against your interests to simplify in that way, to broad stroke an entire group of people. I like to believe that most of you out there know inherently that that's wrong. Even if sometimes it feels good because you're aligned with some larger organization or a group that high fives you back. The point is that somewhere in you, if you have integrity, morals, you know it's not right. There's something wrong with that. At the end of the day, you can clearly see that your governments, the power structures, have an interest in keeping you in that kind of mindset. That is the two-party illusion for you. Oh, it's too complicated here. Just pick one or the other. All done. It's not that simple. And I think we're all beginning to see that. So thank you for supporting this platform and continuing to stand behind the truth. Objective reality. We don't each have our individual truths. There is one truth. And yeah, sometimes we disagree about that truth, but there's still only one in each, whatever we're talking about. There's a truth. And I think today we've had to kind of weed, what's the right word for it? Weave back and forth through all these different agendas, during the trans conversation, my truth. And that's the whole kind of left-leaning woke mindset and all that. But interestingly enough, despite using the same terminology, it's the same damn thing on the right. Because they're the same thing. It's the same extreme thing from either side, ultimately lost in the same kind of dynamics, just using different wedge talking points to get there. Now, I'm just going to probably bother all of them when I say that, but that's the point. That's what we do. Objective, nonpartisan. Hopefully we're building those numbers. I believe somewhere in there, I think we're doing so. I think it's just hard to see. But thank you for being here and backing us up and continuing to stand for these things, guys, because you're making a difference every day. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.